Go right to this. That way I don't mess it up. We're a couple of minutes away from starting.
It's number 5.
Leah's getting us signed on. You're good? Okay. Hey, could I get order in the audience, please? We're about ready to start. Leah, we're online? Okay.
Can everybody put their mics on?
Mic's on? Okay. All right, we've got a packed agenda. So I'm going to call to order the monthly planning board meeting of Wednesday, May 8th at 6:30 PM. First item is agenda continuances, modifications. Anything, Mr. Lewinsky? So in deference to the number of items we have on the board tonight, I'd entertain a motion to continue item number 6, which is the planning board study to make recommendations on proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance use table. Town planner informs us that there's still some background information that is forthcoming. Is that correct, Leah?
That's correct.
Okay. So if whatever the board's pleasure is, I'd entertain a motion to continue item 6.
I'll make a motion to continue item 6 to the board meeting on June 12th.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. That item 6 is continued. Item 7 is just a call for comment on a freshwater wetlands altercation down on Old Mill Lane for the gas property. I'd like to move that up ahead if we could, if it's possible, dismiss that in a timely manner, whatever the board's pleasure is. If you made a motion to move it to item number 3.
Make a
That-
motion to take item number 7, the DEM comments, and move it to item 3.
I'll
Okay.
second that.
All right. Got a motion made and second. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. Okay, first item of business is the approval of minutes for the planning board meeting of April 10th, 2024. What is your pleasure?
I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes as written.
Second.
We have a motion made and second. Any discussion? I'll be abstaining from the vote because I was not present. If there's no discussion, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. All right, next item on our agenda will be the Department of Environmental Management, DEM, has requested comments regarding the application of Narragansett Electric Company requesting permission to alter freshwater wetlands located south of Old Mill Lane. Does the board have any comments on the notice that was in the package? No comments?
I was just, Mr. Chair, I was just trying to confirm if we know, what I saw is between the square footage that they're looking to restore the wetlands. Is 18,000 square feet. And the area disturbance is 74,000. It sounds like DEM's recommending going forward, just asking for a courtesy recommendation. But does that disturbance mean they're removing that volume of wetlands, or they're just impacting?
It looks like an impact, Mr. Tibbetts, but on sheet 7 of 8, it looks like they're relocating or restoring another section of wetland, according to the
Right, I
prints
got
that were
that.
included.
Yeah,
But all they're asking for, I believe, is the comment on the package. Ms. Hitchens said that we got a copy for the zoning board, the planning board, the town council,
Yeah,
if there's comments.
Right.
No comment? Okay. I'm gonna call for public comment on this item. Is there anybody in the audience that wants to comment on this? Please, sir, step forward.
Excuse me, I don't know that, I think this is just for planning board.
Oh, this is just for the planning board?
Yeah, there's been all kinds of hearings on this project.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry, sir. There is no public comment taken tonight for this petition. It's just a request to alter. I'll give you deference, sir, if you have a few things to state. I know you because you came out for the meeting and you didn't know ahead of time. But if you could keep it short, please state your name and address for the record.
My name's Stephen McDonald. I live at 124 Old Mill Lane, directly across the street from that particular project. One of the things I just like to point out, of course, is that, as you well know, one of your duties is to protect the existing natural and built environment and to mitigate all significant negative impacts the proposed development, in this case, what they're proposing to do on the existing environment. And I do stress the existing environment. I was going to read something, a passage from a book called Losing Eden. I'm not going to do that because you're giving me permission to speak. I thought I was going to have permission, but I'm not going to go into that. What I am going to do, though, is ask you, the planning board, that in your comments to DEM, that the town of Portsmouth recommend to DEM that permission be denied to alter the freshwater wetlands located south of Old Mill Lane, as it would have a negative impact on the existing natural and built environment. What leads me to say that? Well, my Eden, my Garden of Eden includes my property, the surrounding neighborhood, and the wetlands that Rhode Island Energy currently controls. For many years prior to 2019, fox, other mammals, numerous bird species, butterflies, insects of all kinds, frogs and turtles used that area. Turtles were one thing that I really enjoyed because I would bring my kids out in the springtime and inevitably they would cross the street from their property to either my property or the two properties north of me. This hasn't happened since 2019. 2019, of course, that winter is when we had that horrible energy crisis. And what National Grid had to do is they had to build a fence and they end up developing that part of the land. The natural world, the local natural world that I live in there and the surrounding neighbors, it's been negatively impacted by the recent changes that Rhode Island Energy and National Grid has made to that area. And I truly believe, based on their past performance and what they've done, if permission is given to Rhode Island Energy to alter the freshwater wetlands, it's going to further negatively impact our neighborhood. I would love to have my kids have the same kind of environment that I do, and certainly my grandkids. Truthfully, I don't think it's going to happen. And one of the reasons why it's not going to happen is that entities like Rhode Island Energy are allowed to go in and change things. I know in the plans it says that they're going to take one area and make it a wetland, and this area is going to be a wetland, and it's not going to be a wetland anymore. But we're going to go ahead and make it so this other part of the land is a wetland. When you start doing that, you change that geographic area forever. So I ask you, additionally, there's one other thing that I would like to bring up. The 2020 Rhode Island Act on Climate that was passed by the state legislature there's a requirement of a 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, 80% reduction by 2040, and a net zero by 2050. I don't see how supporting Rhode Island Energy's request to alter the wetlands and therefore using that as a area to where they can transfer the gas, a transfer station, is going to help the state at all achieve its greenhouse gas emissions goals. So I beg and urge you to say in your comments, no, we don't want this. We want to have a clean environment for not just us, but my kids, and your grandkids. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
That's all I
McDonald.
have.
Mr. McDonald, Mr. McDonald. Hey, Mr. McDonald, one point. You can, if you can't, your comments are on the record.
Yeah.
Your objections on the record, so thank you. There is in the application, you have until May 20th to submit your written comments to the DEM as well.
I
Okay,
will be doing so,
All right.
of course.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is former item 3, now item 4. Owner Jardin Holdings LLC, AP 62, Lot 6, 272 Glen Farm Road. Request for an opinion to create an 11-lot subdivision as an open space residential subdivision. Hey, before we get started, could I just see a show of hands who's here for this petition? That's what I thought. We are not going to be taking a vote tonight. I just want to make sure everyone knows that this is strictly a concept presentation. There's no vote taken by the board. We're certainly going to do our best to hear anyone from the public that wants to comment. Let's remember our social decorum while we're here, and we'll have a well-orderly meeting. So, Mr. Hingarami, if your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. Good evening. Neil Hingarani, 3102 East Main Road, Portsmouth, Rhode Island. Great. Thank you. My company, Narragansett Engineering, was hired by the property owner, Fei and Guang, who are also here tonight, Jardin Holdings LLC, to prepare a conceptual subdivision design. Obviously, as many of you folks know, it's a conceptual subdivision. We're here fact-finding as much as presenting. At this point, no definitive decisions have been made on the parcel. This is an effort, obviously, to meet with the board to get some feedback and see what the response is going to be on a particular project. There's obviously going to be some comment from the abutters here, and I think we'll probably hear that tonight. Should our clients decide to proceed further, I may recommend that they try to have a follow-up meeting, stakeholder meeting with the abutters to try to whittle down any parsable comments into action on the plan if possible, because we understand this is going to, it's quite a unpopular potential project. I would assume the comments we'll hear tonight.
I think that's a fair statement.
Sure. Yes, of course. So again, the goal is here to understand the issues and constraints surrounding the subdivision, to calculate the potential subdivision yield, AKA the maximum feasible number of lots the development could support, and identify further steps for analysis and planning. Up to this point, we've done only a GIS-based subdivision plan, a review of utilities, very sparse surveying, road, culverts and roads, no boundary surveys, no topography. We've done some wetland delineation and a buffer calculation. We have also done a yield plan, a conventional yield plan that was included in the submitted plans, and 2 conservation subdivision options. We've had some discussions with coastal staff and 2 TRC meetings along with meetings with town staff. Just information about the parcel. It's 272 Glen Farm Road, plat 62, lot 6, zoned R60 with approximately 30 and a half acres. It is an existing 3-bedroom, single-family dwelling. It's served by an OWTS and a well. The site is wooded, has 2 rivers running through it. It's in coastal wetlands jurisdiction. There's a beach access trail along the northerly portion of the river, quite something. There's a couple historic bridges and structures on the parcel, and perhaps obviously it abuts Glen Manor to the north. It is served by Glen Farm Access Road. I may abbreviate that as GFAR, which is a quasi-public, essentially a private right-of-way running from Glen Farm to Sandy Point. This road has multiple stream crossings. It abuts wetlands for much of its run. It is paved, although the condition varies. There is a Portsmouth Water and Fire District waterline easement for approximately the first 900 feet of the road from Glen Farm. But the obvious problem is that the road is thin. The road does not meet subdivision requirements. It is approximately 12 feet wide, although it certainly has some pinch points. More or less in those pinch points, it is at present suitable for one-way vehicle traffic. The DPW currently maintains and plows the road, though I'm told they can essentially bill the abutters for the work because it is a private right-of-way. Along the roadway itself, there's numerous impediments in the way that would be difficult to remove to widen the road. There's wetlands on both sides. There's steep slopes, fences, trees. There's some stone pillars in sections. I will talk about this more later. I'm also told that on Saturdays, polo traffic is problematic. The road backs up pretty substantially and is even impassable. It's a backdoor way to polo through Linden. There have been multiple subdivisions on this in the past. Many of those plans are snipped and were included in the plan set we submitted. Most recently, there was a mill house, quote unquote, parcel to the north of this site that was approved in 2006. There was a 2-lot minor subdivision in 2016. I think many of you were maybe here. That was approved at the planning board, but denied its zoning. On to the next page here. So Glen Farm Access Road and the Linden Lane extension would be important to potential development here. I have copies of a title report that was submitted by Paula Kupalo. I'm going to pass these out right now.
Yeah, do we have enough for the solicitor and the town planner? Thank you.
These were emailed to the planner a bit earlier today. Obviously, won't have time to digest that, but it has been made available. Based on some discussions with the title attorney, my understanding is that the applicant would have the right to install water in Glen Farm Access Road as the it's a non-exclusive rights that have been passed to the owner via the prior subdivisions. That's for utilities. For the roadway itself is where it gets a little bit more complicated. Those rights don't necessarily extend to widening the road, right? It's the abutters or the folks who abut that particular section of Glen Farm Access Road who would control it. So there would be an opportunity to potentially widen the road with the town's consent in the areas where the town abuts or essentially abuts the road, considering it's a right of way. In a situation where it's private parcels that abut on both sides, I'm very doubtful that they would consent to road widening. So that would possibly prevent some pinch points, particularly on the north side, where there is a substantial section, hundreds of feet, that would not be able to be widened without a butter's consent. We also have what I've been calling Linden Lane Extension. Again, it's shown up on the screen here. There is a public section of Linden Lane that has been deeded. And obviously, Linden Lane is a one-way road itself. There is also a 50-foot right-of-way that extends off of Linden Lane where it intersects Glen Farm Access Road. Again, based on the title report you have, it would appear that the town would have rights to that and that it would be theoretically possible to extend a water line to connect to a water main that exists on Linden Lane. And I'll get to why that's important in a moment. In terms of utilities, there's electric available. Public water on the next slide is only available essentially to the parcel up to the north, basically on the Mill House parcel. Otherwise, public water is not available until you get all the way to Sandy Point or further up on Linden Lane. For a project of this magnitude, it would be obviously ideal for public water to be available for firefighting. And for domestic water, we've had some meetings with the Portsmouth Water Department. They've indicated that they would like to see the water line looped. And this would be the way to do so, to run it down Glen Farm Access Road and through the Linden Lane extension. If that were not possible, the alternative would be private wells, potentially with water storage tanks, likely pumps for an NFPA 13 or 13R sprinkler system. That would very likely diminish the subdivision yield, considering that OWTS systems would also be required for those parcels. So this part is critical since Glen Farm Access Road is a private roadway that does not conform to the subdivision road standards. A variance would be required for this development. Obviously, there's potential difficulty associated with that, given the permitting history. Based on the new enabling legislation, our understanding is that a 9-lot subdivision would now be termed a minor subdivision, and that a variance could be handled by the planning board under unified development review. Well, the plans we've submitted show 11 lots. That's essentially based off the yield. I think it's a virtual certainty that any further master plan submission would have to be for 9 lots or less. The 1997 subdivision of the parcel, which is recorded as HC 8-A-5, subdivided a 2.9 acre strip. It contained a restriction, which I quote says, "No further subdivision of these lots without construction of public roads." That was highlighted in the planner's report. We have Attorney Fung here tonight who will speak to that more specifically. I think the Millhouse lot was actually subdivided after that restriction was put in place. This is more of a legal argument, but my understanding is that it's not strictly possible for a prior board to bind a future board's decisions. But again, Attorney Fung will discuss that more. That's obviously a critical potential impediment to development here. On to the next slide, if we could. So in this case, we would perhaps obviously consider a residential open space development, cluster, or conservation subdivision. The plan submitted, C100, was a yield plan, again, to determine the maximum number of potential lots. We submitted 2 concept designs. Sheet C101 is what I would term a very vanilla layout, straight road, square lots, pretty standard. C102 is, I think, a little bit more nuanced. Again, just a curved road, thinner entries, I think a little bit more of an interesting lot. The goals of a conservation subdivision, and obviously the benefits, would be a reduced road length, minimization of the impervious area. So we have stormwater benefits, reduction of environmental impacts and maintenance burdens, as well as the reduced lot size and environmental impacts. This would also create some open space. And in this case, if we can see here, there would be essentially 2 sections of open space. One that would be sort of surrounding the subdivision itself. Our thoughts is that would stay with the subdivision as part of the association. The other section of open space that abuts the Glen, the applicants are open to options there. Getting the land trust involved or potentially deeding it to the town so that it could be an accessory use to the Glen itself. So the subdivision itself, given the lot, the wetlands constraints, could be an interesting subdivision. I think it could be done keeping a wooded fringe around the property. There's obviously significant benefits of an open space subdivision as opposed to a conventional. I don't necessarily think those are the challenges we're going to talk about tonight. I think the roadway is probably more of the issue, but it's there, it's on the plans. I think we have it for discussion. Some of the constraints that we have, topography is challenging, particularly near the river. It's steep, using the cluster subdivision, particularly the second option, avoids many area of these steep slopes, the bluffs, the wetland buffers. No soil evaluations have been done. This would obviously rely on OWTS systems. It's certainly possible that that also could reduce the subdivision yield. The water line extension that I discussed previously is important. I would say it's not existential to a subdivision, but given the need for sprinklers, it would be challenging without. Access itself is crucial. I think the right to access Glen Farm Access Road is not really a question. It's really the complexities of widening the roadway that are the the critical factor, I think, that would be a point of discussion for development here. Did read the record for the prior application. I think we would be very cognizant that we would have to provide traffic impact, have civil side look at, what the options are for actually widening the road. Again, there's spots where that may be achievable. I think there's spots where that may not be achievable, just given the wetlands and the topographic constraints. And I think that's a big piece of the puzzle that the board would need to weigh in on, whether that's even something that they would potentially entertain. Emergency vehicle and construction access obviously requires some thought and study. Post-construction repairs to the road would obviously be need to considered. We would require CRMC permitting. We're within freshwater wetlands vicinity. I don't think that's existential. It's more par for the course. An easement could be granted to the town for the widening of the road along the applicant's parcel. We've shown that on the plan. One of the other constraints discussing with the fire chief is that the structures need to be within 150 feet of the roadway. He would effectively require the houses be sprinklered given the limited access, and would like them improved even in since we may not meet the fire apparatus road, the NFPA 101 requirements. Further steps, if we can go to the page 6, soil evaluations are obviously necessary for OWTS feasibility. Perhaps obviously meeting with the stakeholders, to say the least, would be an important steps. Boundary survey, legal property boundaries, identify the full wetlands and the buffers along Glen Farm Access Road. I think, again, this is the key piece, to identify sections of Glen Farm Access Road that could be widened at a minimum to allow cars to pass and critically to facilitate safe emergency vehicle access. We would need to review this with the fire department in conjunction with the specification for the sprinkler to find a balance between the road improvements and, how much the houses are protected. Where these fall specifically, given realistic constraints, the land evidence constraints, the wetlands, how wide we can make the road. I think, 20 feet would be a more pragmatic width than I think what the standard 24, 28, governed by the subdivision regulations. But I think finding that balance that also improves the accessibility for the roadway for emergency vehicles, passenger vehicle and pedestrian circulation would be quite critical. I did snip an example of farmlands if the board wasn't familiar with it. This is a similar but not the same situation where 12-foot farm lane, many of you are probably familiar with it, but 12-foot farm lane was used for an 8-lot subdivision. Instead of widening the entire roadway, they basically put in 24-foot wide pathways, right? So it's a spot where cars could pull aside each other and get down. As far as I know, that subdivision's been there for 20 years now. Yeah, about 20 years, and I'm not aware of any major issues or access impediments.
Well, I think one of the differences, Neil, is that subdivision has frontage every lot has frontage on Wapping Road.
Every lot. So technically speaking, every lot has frontage on Wapping Road, but they don't have access on Wapping
Correct.
Road. The driveways are all off Farmlands
Right.
Lane. So it's a fair point. I think it's a technical difference, but practically speaking, the way the road functions would be similar. Again, there's a lot of differences here. This road curves, there's many more constraints, but it's a fair point. So ultimately, the planning board does have some discretion to allow thinner roadways than are required in an open space residential development. I'm sure you're all familiar with this provision, but I'll just read it. The planning board may permit narrower pavement widths on dead ends and cul-de-sacs, which will never be extended or connected to another street and where traffic drainage and utility considerations allow. Just to close this up before we get Mr. Attorney Fung up here. Again, we realize this is a very complicated situation, to say the least. We're here at Concept to hear feedback, and have an open discussion, and really understand, your feedback for what we're up against. So we'd welcome that.
So let's, before we move on to Attorney Fung, let's ask any members of the board if they have any immediate comment on what Mr. Ingarami presented.
Yeah, so.
Can you speak into the microphone, Mr. Tibbetts?
Sorry. So Glen, just to go over this again, Glen Farm Access Road is currently how wide?
It looks like it ranges from 12 to,
Measured it today, maybe 18 to 18 feet in spots.
So typically we build a 22, 24, commonly waved down to 20, but it would at least for safety reasons need to be that. Nobody's questioning that, right, on the right of way.
I think that's what we're here to discuss, whether that is the bare minimum that I think this board would accept, or whether we could widen it in spots and leave existing spots at, I'm just making up a number here, 16 feet, where if you have a wetland on one side or a steep slope or something like that, whether that's even on the table.
And so representing the petitioner as a public right of way, you're saying it's the town's responsibility that the petitioner doesn't have responsibility to.
Oh, no, I don't think that's the
Access.
case. I think we're doing the development here. It would be our responsibility to widen that road. I think that part is clear. But again, it would need the town's consent. So I think part of this is, we haven't really fully determined which way would be cleaner or more expeditious, going north or going south. I think we'd really need to survey the entire length, get those wetlands delineated, get a full feel for what's going on out there. But I think either situation, neither of them is clean and simple. I think in neither going north or going south, do I see the opportunity where you can do a clear-cut 20-foot road the whole way through. I think there's going to be too many challenges and too many impediments there to make that work.
So.
I think the fire department actually commented that they can't do a north entrance. Is that correct? Because it's so severely constrained. It would have to be a southerly entrance.
They didn't comment on that specifically, but there is a curve right around the stables where
I might have read that in one of the previous decisions. I apologize, but I'm assured that that was a comment.
I would imagine
There's
that.
one way that they can't get in there.
So I don't believe, I asked them if they could get in there now. I think their answer was, they can, but it obviously takes some time and they have to be very careful and slow to get there. It wouldn't surprise me if they could not get there from the north, given that curve, with the existing condition.
So in easements out to a 20-foot width road are possible, but the main impact is wetlands, or what else is there? Physical obstructions?
I think it's mostly wetlands. If we're going on the south side, I think it's mostly wetlands. I think the north has some steeper slopes associated, but I would say the south is mostly wetlands.
Do you have the land to offer offsetting wetlands, or is that perceived as the petitioner's responsibility?
I think it would, yeah, I mean, it's a fair question. I think there's probably some land to offset wetlands, and that's probably a discussion we could have with DEM. Yeah, I think if we were doing it with the town's consent, it is a little bit of a different discussion with the state. And if it could be supported that it's necessary, you know, if we're talking about literally a few feet of pavement, and I think that's probably something that could be achieved with the state, yeah, with some offsets, it's not completely unreasonable.
Anything else, Mr. Tibbetts?
Yeah, I know.
Go ahead, Mr. Hardy.
So in the winter time, with all the big trees and everything, when it snows, that place is like dead to traffic. There's no place to put snow. There's no place. I mean, I just could not fathom that the fire department in an emergency case could even for a split second think that in the way the road is now and the way it is in the winter, which is way worse than it is on a nice day like yesterday or something like that. I don't know how you can pass that hurdle, because I guarantee you, if they came down that road in the winter time, there is no way any kind of, just an ambulance, let alone a ladder, you know, fire truck or anything like that could make it through there. I'm anxious to hear what the fire department, like a letter from them, would have to say, because you have such a big hurdle in front of you right now. It's,
Well aware, I think part of what we would have to do is put in snow storage areas, you know, where there are opportunities between wetlands, you know, how big, where those can go. Again, that's part of what would be the next step, and I think that's why we're here to determine how feasible that is. But yes, it's a fair point, and I think it's necessary for access.
Anything else, Mr. Hardy?
not at the moment.
Any other board members have a comment? Yeah, I have a couple, Neil. So, do you have the staff report?
I do, yes.
Okay. So it is on page 20. The fire department cannot access the property from the north Glen Road due to current conditions, and it probably is as you noted there. I know we get the title report on no further subdivision. I think Mr. Gavin's gonna analyze that. We'll understand that better.
I just
Go ahead.
say, this is a pre-application, there's no
Right.
application pending.
Correct.
And I don't think, yeah, we can hear what they have to say, but I'm not gonna give any opinion on, I mean,
Understood.
generally speaking, I would say that, generally speaking, I would concur that a condition can be revisited by a future planning board, and a planning board can't bind future planning boards forever into the future. But I just want to, again, remind you that there's no application pending.
Correct.
There's no public hearing. Our regulations specifically state that the board is not required to have a public hearing on a pre-application concept plan. So, I mean, this is obviously a very sketchy situation. I just want to remind the board that it's not a public hearing, so I don't know how far down the road you want to go. The purpose of this is to
Sure.
get some feedback from the board as to the very preliminary sketchy idea of a potential future application for development.
Understand. Thank you for those comments, Mr. Gavin. I'll clarify that Mr. Gavin will not review that till such a time that you actually make a full submittal. So
Duly
just
noted. Thank you.
clarify.
Can
Go ahead,
I ask,
go ahead.
yeah, Mr. Gavin, you had said that the board is not required to have people speak, right? But it doesn't say that we can't.
No, it's at the discretion of the chair, but I'm
Yeah.
saying it's not there's no application for any development before, so I mean.
Yep.
I'm just pointing out you're not required to.
Sure.
I'm not saying you can't.
Appreciate
hear public
that.
input.
Okay, so just, I want to reiterate that our DPW director and the fire department chief both had grave concerns over this. And the fact that they wouldn't have access, we're charged with making sure we have proper public safety, and public safety apparatus can get down there. So those are two things that I can't see moving past that unless you fix that. So that's my personal comment. There was a few things in the previous zoning decisions. I didn't know if the applicant, I know one of them was not fully approved, but there was some comments on a guardrail to be placed along Glen Farm Road for approximately 300 feet. near the Sandy Point entrance. Was that ever done? Do you know?
Not to my knowledge, and if I remember correctly, it said something to the effect that the placement would be decided by DPW, or I don't know if there was a specific placement noted on that guardrail in that decision.
Okay,
But we just drove it today, and I don't believe that guardrail was ever installed.
okay. And then they also made reference to some trees that they identified to come down. Were those ever taken down?
It would be very hard to determine which trees, if any,
I just
came
didn't know if you
down.
knew offhand. That's
No, but as far as I can tell, I'm not sure, but there's no obvious evidence.
okay. And then lastly, does the existing home have a sprinkler system that's on the parcel?
That's a fair question. Actually, I do not know the answer to that. I have to hear from the applicants.
Okay. All right, so there's no other questions from the board, so please continue with your testimony.
Good evening, Chair and Members of the Committee. Alan Fung with law firm of Lapazera and Laprasina on behalf of Jardin Holdings LLC. I'll be brief because I just want to touch upon that what was noted on the planning staff report about the prior restriction on further subdivisions. As the solicitor pointed out, it's been noted even in the prior decisions from the former attorney for Ms. McLean that past boards can't really bind future planning boards. And I think Neil pointed out what happened in the history as it related to that subdivision of the mill house on Glen Farm Access Road. But, in furtherance of that, our Supreme Court has been clear that boards of review do have the authority to reverse a prior decision. I'll just put on the record for you, Avakian Funeral Home versus the Zoning Board of Review of the City of Providence. That's 216 Atlantic 2nd, 704. But, usually in those circumstances, the board takes a look at the material change from the two applications, and upon a proper showing of the changed circumstances or cause, they have that ability to impose whatever decision that they have in front of them. So, like I indicated before, the Supreme Court has, plenty of decisions out there about what the board should consider. And, if an application or when an application comes forward, we can further expand upon that. But I just wanted to note that for the record that, it's our belief that you do have that ability to look at and overcome that no further subdivision that's on the record right now.
Thank you.
Any question?
Any questions?
I do.
Go ahead, Mr. Harding.
So, Mr. Funk, knowing now if that's the case, when we as a board give someone the, what they were asking for based on coming up with, like we did back then, saying no more subdivision, if that now is something that can be reversed, we're going to play it safe and just say no to the first opportunity. So it's not that great of a thing to then say, well, just because you say it, that doesn't mean it means anything. It's only going to backfire as far as I'm concerned.
No, I understand that. And there's plenty of attorneys I know that are in the audience right now, people that I respect. But as they can assure you too, there are other ways to also extinguish those type of restrictions, under the law too. Agreement of the parties, could be one, so long as you extinguish all of the individuals entitled in all the chains that would have a standing. So there are different methods to extinguish these type of restrictions. But what I'm just saying to you is for this board, you do have the ability to consider that application and overcome what has been noted in the planning record.
I guess I'm going to just come back to that. If I knew then what you're saying now, I would have denied it.
I
No,
understand.
it's, yeah.
I understand and respect your, what you're saying. We're just at the concept stage right now.
Yeah,
That's why we're just putting,
totally understood.
everything, just to get some feedback, because I think Mr. Neil indicated, if we were to proceed, one of the next steps, and this is what I do with many of my clients too, is have that public meeting to hear more of the feedback from many of the residents. That's why we're also here tonight to listen to, any concerns, see if it can be addressed, listen to the board as well. And I know the chair had raised some issues that were on him that it is incumbent upon us to go back with our clients and, have that further discussion.
Anything else from board members? And I also would suggest, I know this is just a concept plan, we are gonna hear some public comment, and I hope you take it to heart. I know you will. I would implore you, after we adjourn this part of the petition, you conduct some type of a meeting with your neighbors
Yeah.
before you get here.
Yeah.
I think it would help immensely.
No, absolutely, Chair. And before, like I indicated before, that's what my normal practice with other development clients too, because we'd rather try to address many of these concerns ahead of time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Hey, I would ask, are there any other folks represented by attorneys in the audience? I'd like to see if they've got an argument to put forward. Mr. Regan, please step forward and state your name and address for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Peter Regan with the firm of Sayer, Regan and Thayer at 130 Bellevue Avenue in Newport. I'm here tonight representing Jeff and Jan Gordon, who live at 185 Glen Farm Road across the street from this site, and Jonathan and Aaron Chapman, who live at 120 Glen Farm Road, direct abutter to the north. And I'm just going to, I know that a lot of folks want to meet, so I'm going to put aside any environmental and open space issues that I know a lot of other folks are going to talk about. My clients are adamantly opposed to this proposal for one simple reason, and that is that Glen Farm Road is woefully inadequate for two-way traffic and for emergency vehicles. And this is not a situation where this development would be a tipping point. The road's already unsafe. That's already happened. And there really shouldn't be any dispute that it's unsafe because the applicant is here with a plan with a 12-foot strip, presumably to widen the road in spots, and has suggested that the town, where the town owns frontage, it could be widened, but acknowledges at the same time there are other areas of the road that will not be widened, either because of consent needed from neighbors or because of wetlands and other environmental issues. So as a practical matter, you're not going to be able to widen this road and make it safe. And I think the town's acknowledged that in the way it's treated the prior proposals for this property. That subdivision that was approved in 1988, the original subdivision by Ms. McLean, with the condition that there be no further subdivision. And I think it's helpful to understand why that was done, because at that time, that property had frontage on the cul-de-sac of Colonel Barton Drive. And the normal phase of development would have been to extend that road into this property. Ms. McLean chose not to do that and essentially cut off that access. And this board said, yes, you can do that, but since now the only access is Glen Farm Road, no further subdivision. And there were a number of other administrative subdivisions that were done, one in 1997 with that same condition. There was the subdivision in 2016, which was a two-lot subdivision, which was denied once again over concerns about the safety of the road by the zoning board. Now, my brother, Mr. Fung, my brother, and Mr. Gavin have stated that, a prior board cannot tie the hands of a future board. And I don't disagree with that, but at a minimum, you've got to take a look at why the condition was imposed in the first place, and then decide whether the circumstances have changed enough to warrant removing that condition. And in this case, that hasn't happened. Situation's only gotten worse. There are more houses, there's more traffic. When that original condition was put on in 88, the rec complex wasn't there. So we've got all this traffic, we've got backups on the weekend, and it just makes no sense. That condition is more important today than it was when it was originally imposed in 1988. This project would more than double the number of houses on Glen Farm Road, more than double. That means you're talking about more than doubling the traffic on Glen Farm Road, a road that is already unsafe. This was a bad idea when it was a two-lot subdivision. It's an incredibly bad idea now when it's an 11-lot subdivision. So we appreciate your time. We appreciate you letting us all speak tonight. Appreciate the comments and feedback. And we'll look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Hold on, let's ask any board members, they have any comments for Mr. Regan.
I don't know if it's for Mr. Regan, but tying into that, so if we accept that the road would have to be widened to be safer, there's wetlands issues, there's easement, that you've touched on that you need by consent by neighbors. Is that the easement width? There's some of this length of the road depends on the neighbors to say, yes, we bless.
It's a private right of way, so there was a suggestion that it could be widened with the town's consent on the areas where the town owns frontage. Now, I'm not sure about that because some of that land was donated and there may be restrictions in the conservation grant for that property that we're going to take a look at. But certainly there are stretches of that road that cannot be widened because of either environmental issues or because the owners that have frontage on those other areas are not going to consent. So you're going to have maybe a little wider here, pinch point here, a little wider there, pinch point there. It's not going to do anything to mitigate the problems with the road being unsafe. And certainly not going to mitigate circumstances enough that you will double the number of houses that are on that street.
Anything else from the board? Okay,
Thank you very much.
And I'm just gonna. Attorney Fung or Neil, do you have any comments on Mr. Regan's comments?
Just briefly, yeah, understand the concerns. Obviously, we would take those to heart. I can't speak specifically to the traffic issues. We would obviously engage a traffic expert to weigh in on the number of vehicles from the, I've spoken to ours and I don't think the issue is necessarily passenger traffic, but I do think it's emergency vehicles. I think that's the pinch point. It's actually a fair point on the conservation easement. If we were to widen the road, it would be within the pre-existing Glen Farm access road easement. So I'm actually not sure if the conservation easement restrictions would extend into that, but it's an absolutely fair point that we should check into. So appreciate it.
I don't have anything for
Okay,
that.
all right. Hey, go ahead. All right. Before I open it up to comment, I ask that we raise our hand. I'll recognize you and then you come to the podium, state your name and address for the record and try and keep it brief. We did receive 3 letters from abutters that were against the petition. I'd just like to get those into the record. I'm not going to read them fully, but I will say that we had some abutters, Jonathan and Aaron Chapman, Julia Cole, C-O-L-L, and Mr. and Mrs. Gordon. I just asked the board that they enter those into the record as exhibits 1, 2, and 3. Make a motion.
I'll make a motion to accept the 3 letters written into the record.
You have a second? Second by Mr. Garso. Any discussion on the comment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right. So we'll open it up to some public comment. I see one hand in the back, ma'am. If you want to come forward, you look like you beat everybody to it. Please come up, state your name and address for the record. And again, we'll try and hear as many people as we can, but please keep them brief, okay?
Hi,
Because we are not taking a vote tonight.
I understand. I'm Emily Skian from 40 Cutler Court, Portsmouth. I'm a marine scientist with a wetland biology training, and I have walked before the new owners restricted access. I have walked the entire area and personally know that wetlands will absolutely impact this project, both widening the road as well as what they have proposed for the subdivision plan. I also formerly worked for Coastal Resource Management Council, and while I was there, previous to this project, accumulated the documents for prescription by easement for a right-of-way. And I do feel that we do have the jurisdiction and the records that would, in time, establish this as a public right-of-way. I personally don't think that the owner should be using the public access to the trail as incentive for the planning board to make this decision. That should not be a carrot and stick for your decision making. I think the science alone will inform this decision that it will be prohibitive and not possible. I use that road, I walk that road. I have kids on that road that it's already completely unsafe. And with climate change, our extreme weather events are becoming more and more intense, and we can expect weather events to make the road continue to be unsafe.
Okay,
Thank you for your time.
thank you. Yes. Ma'am in the front row, yes, you had your hand up second.
I'm Carol Ann Brown from Fisher Road. I donated the 29 acres on Sandy Point that included the first part of that road. And when we were in the discussions, the land trust and the town promised me that road would not be widened. It wouldn't be used commercially. And I have the conservation rights and everything. I didn't bring them tonight because I didn't know we were going to have an opportunity to speak. But that road was really dangerous at the time. And the condition for me donating those 29 acres was to ensure that the town would maintain that road, but not widen it or change the woodlands, anything around it. So I don't know how the town can go in and now widen that road when they have promised me and I gave land, and that was the reason I gave it. And ironically, that road was supposed to be named the Paul Brown Road because I donated that land in the name of my husband, Captain Paul Brown. So
Thank you for your comments. Again, there is no vote. There's no vote tonight. So we're not voting on the road width. We're not voting on any of that. Next to Butters, anyone want to speak? Mr. Brady?
I'm John Brady, for those of you who do not know me. I own property on Immokalee Drive on the shore down here. I'm currently living in Atria Assisted Living, but I still have my interest in my property on Immokalee Drive. For credentials, I have a bachelor's and master's degree in engineering from MIT, a PhD from URI, and I was at one time a registered professional engineer in the state of Rhode Island. I didn't use that license for much of anything because I had a good position at the underwater weapons station and then Raytheon. So that's who I am and where I am from. I am a member of the Friends of Glen Manor House, which is an abutter to this property. I'm also a member of the Aquidneck Land Trust, which has, I hope, some interest in this property. But as a resident of Portsmouth, I'm concerned to have open space in Portsmouth, number one. As an engineer, and incidentally, I do have a son-in-law who is a registered practicing engineer in the state. I have looked at the proposed two sketches as to where lots and roads would be put on this property. It looks to me like they're all on the side of a hill. And those of you who have driven down there or walked down there know that that property, thanks to the glacier, is nothing but slate and rocks with some million years of surface being formed over it. The proposed lots, that I saw two proposed designs for these. One of them had a short road going into a circle that had 6 concentric roads going out to 6 different houses. And it looks like it would be one big mass of blacktop there. Also, when you look at the proposed locations of the lots, in either of those designs, the lots are on sides of hills in areas where has never been tested for what kind of structures below. But from looking at the surface, we can predict there's lots of slate and lots of places for water to run. There are 2 brooks that run through the property, which are ideal receptors for water that comes down through that property and all dumps into the Secundant River, which we all know and love. So I hope, gentlemen, that you take some of these considerations. We don't need this in this town. We could use the open space that is potentially there for Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, walkers, what have you. It's beautiful property. It joins the Glen Manor House property. That's one of the things that really concerns us. The Manor House is kept as open space for the most part, and we'd like to have this continue the open space. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brady. Lady in the back in the light colored top, please. Name and address for the record.
If you can spell it, that'd be great. It's Sarah Chepazak, 114 Sigourney Road in Portsmouth. I'm an immediate abutter on 114 Sigourney Road, which is the cul-de-sac closest to Sandy Point Beach.
Could you speak into the mic a little clearer? Thank you.
Sure. Sorry, I work from home. I'm not used to speaking in front of this many people.
All right, take your time.
So everybody spoke about all the roadway, which seems to be the major topic as they kick off the beginning of this project. I'm not an engineer. I do run that road with my neighbor every day at 6 a.m. So if any of you have seen me, I run in the dark. I see all sorts of animals in this area. So to lean more on the warm and fuzzy side of things, just being the green space that is, and just I'm 4th generation Aquinic Islander. I've seen so much green space be developed. I'm tired of seeing it be developed. Portsmouth was known as the the rural town. It is slowly becoming more and more commercial, Airbnbs, rental houses, etc. And so just the idea of that green space being taken, all the furry animals that I see on my runs at 6 a.m., the deer that are in my yard coming from that property, the raccoons, I almost call them something else, the raccoons, the possums, the chipmunks, all the wildlife. I would hate to see that be taken from them. I would hate to see that be taken from our community, our amazing neighborhood that the petitioners are a part of. They don't even know us. We're a great neighborhood. We would love to have you live in that property, but to have it be developed would be heartbreaking. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other abutters care to speak? Yes, the gentleman straight back.
Good evening, Curtis Parker, 312 Glen Farm Road. So we're just up on the Sandy Point side of the proposed development. For all the very practical reasons that have been brought up tonight. 100% agree with those, but we're very much opposed to any further development. Mostly because it's going to change the character. It's a very nice, very sort of unique little corner of Portsmouth, and for the safety of the residents, for the environmental reasons we've discussed, for all of those reasons, we're very much opposed, and just want to go on the record saying that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, gentleman in the front row. Mr. Garman.
Jim Garman, 14 Sandy Point Avenue. I used to be a runner. And I ran down that way a lot. What's wrong with open space? And we really need it. I've written a history of the Glen Farm. I spent a lot of time researching the Glen Farm. I was on the Glen Farm committee for about 28 years, and it became a very special place to me. And I think that when we were told a year or two ago that this was all the fences where we used to walk and I used to walk were all being re-erected and closed off because there wanted to be a meditation center in the property. 11 houses is a long way from a meditation center. I think that really that like other areas of the town, I don't think it's developable land. I'm no expert, but I just think that the idea of putting these houses on the side of those hills in there is just, it's a crime. It really would look awful, and looks maybe part of it. The big value, one of the big values we have in this town is what open space is left. And Glen Farm used to be 800 acres. Okay, all the way to Glen Farm Road, from Sandy Point Avenue to Glen Farm Road, all open space and the Glen Farm. Not much of that left anymore, and it's being eaten away. And in spite of the fact that this land is not an active part of Glen Farm, it sure is a nice place to go for a walk or a run. And I really think that that we should do everything we can to prevent the development of a development of 11 houses on that property. It's special space. We're losing our open space, and we really need to save it. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak? Gentlemen, I got two more, so we'll go to the far back and then the gentleman in the middle. Name and address for the record, sir.
August Miller, 600 Bristol Ferry Road.
Good to see you, Mr. Miller.
I come here as the former chairman of the Portsmouth Citizens Advisory Committee that wrote over a 5-year period the original comprehensive plan for the town. It was meant as a living document and to undergo updates. The last update, I believe, is a couple of years ago. In the last 40 years, I've been up and down that road hundreds of times. The Land Use Committee in the Comprehensive Plan Citizens Advisory Group had Peter Merritt and Charlie Allett. And there were compromises of various interests within the town that had to be met in that plan. One of the intentions was that part of Portsmouth would be left as open space, a greenway. And the proposed development really goes against the spirit of what that plan envisioned for that part of the town. I really see it's important for the overall character of the town to keep that as it is and not allow a development in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
John Suter, 390 Glen Farm Road. There was a nice picture of my house on the last slide that the gentleman presented. I don't begrudge the Yangs for wanting to enrich their property and make it better for their own interests. And I do want them to hear me say that I don't consider them the villains in this case. But I'm that being said, I think it's a bad idea. I'm with everybody who's come up here and said the same thing. Glen Farm Road is an amazing, beautiful road. I have an 8-year-old daughter and her friends scooter and bicycle up and down that road, going to soccer camps. I think right now it's pretty safe most of the time for them to do that, but I'm very concerned about what happens when you double the number of houses on that road, and specifically focused in the center of it where there's the least access. Very troubling to think about that. And this sort of development, you know, it goes one way. If you let it go to development, it will not come back. So just wanted to be on the record with my position on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next, Mr. Johnson, and I'll probably only entertain one or two more comments because we do have to wrap this up. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve Johnson, 44 Wapping Road and 0 Glen Farm Road. I'm very familiar with that property. I attempted to buy it with the intention of conserving it with the land trust, but I was unsuccessful. The owner of Rhode Island Nurseries, knowing of my interest in conserving land in that area and keeping it from property development, was kind enough to offer me the opportunity to purchase 13 acres at the corner of Glen and Glen Farm Road, which I subsequently conserved 7.5 acres with the Aquidneck Land Trust through a vehicle called a bargain sale of development rights. I could have done a 8-home development through application through you, building a road, doing a development that looks very much like this. It would have been very much like Cutler Court where Emily lives. I chose not to do that because I believe in conservation. I believe in ocean space. But what I want to suggest to Mr. Fung and his client, who is a professional developer who, once I did some research about him, I realized that our paths have crossed in California, where he is a very successful developer, or was a very successful developer with Jack Nicklaus and others in Monterey, developing courses there and in China and elsewhere. Dr. Yang is bright, he's smart, and I would encourage you to have him explore the possibility of a bird in the hand of continuing to work with the land trust on the bargain sale of the development rights, which can yield a significant sum to him for the uncertain possibility of a development of some number of homes that an appraiser can establish as being reasonably achievable versus going for the two birds, shooting for the sun and hoping for the moon type of thing with this plan here, which strikes me as having a huge amount of obstacles. So to me, has the potential for Dr. Yang to have a win-win situation, have the gratitude of the community, and to be a very profitable exit plan for his investment in 272 Glen Farm Road.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. All right, we'll have one more comment. If anyone has a comment. Yes, sir, in the front.
John Short, 8 Colonel Christopher Green Road, Portsmouth, Rhode Island,
Dr. Short, good to see you.
02871. Just a couple real quick ones. One is that there is 2 segments of the road that aren't paved. And one of the segments washed out sometime in the last, I'd say 12 months, and had to be rebuilt. And that's where the stream runs in right at the curve, okay? What we're seeing is increase potential for significant increase in rainfall because of what we're seeing, an exponential growth in climate change, and that's that the warming brings more water from the oceans and so forth up into the atmosphere. So I'm worried about runoff as well. And there's a couple runoff points here. One runoff point is that it's not going to be easy to fix that piece. That's where there is that on Glen Farm Road, there is no paving through a whole area there. And it's because it washes out periodically. The other thing is that on Linden Lane, there's also a segment that has no paving on it. And that also washes out on a basis. And there's a stream that is dry part of the year and and is wet and runs part of the year, and that has washed that road out before. Your concerns over safety and fire are real. You probably remember a few years ago that we had a house right behind my house that burned down because the fire engines couldn't get hoses to a fire hydrant, and they ran out of water fairly quickly. And thank goodness there was no loss of life, but the concerns that you gentlemen and lady have are real, and we've seen that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So Mr. Hingarami or Attorney Fung, you want to wrap up, and then I think you've heard all the comments. And I'll say something when you're done.
No, please, I think this is what we're here for. So appreciate everyone's time and comment on this and your attention.
But please take to heart what the folks have said. And if we do see you again, hopefully you've addressed these comments.
That will be our aim if we come back.
Thank you. We'll let everybody that was for this petition, if they want to exit the auditorium, then we'll continue our meeting. If we could exit the building, please. Thank you. We have a meeting in progress, all. Thank you. Thank you. We have a meeting in progress. Okay. That's right. All right, we're going to get started with the rest of the meeting, please. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, the next petition is, hello? Thank you. Could you close the doors? Thank you. All right, next up, item number 5, applicant West Shore Road owner Carnegie Trails LLC, AP 26 lot 13. 226 West Shore Road, request for a modification to the final plan regarding a reduced perimeter fence line, removal of pool area from scope of work, and adjusted stone trenches per CRMC. I'm going to turn the meeting over to my vice chair, Mr. Harding, because I have a conflict of interest with this petition as I worked for one of the abutters.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Hart.
Yes. Please state your name.
William Landry. I'm the attorney for the applicant, West Shore Solar LLC. I'm with Blish and Kavanaugh at 30 Exchange Terrace in Providence, Rhode Island. I'd like to provide you a little bit of background on this project. I think most of you may be generally familiar with it. Unlike most of the matters on the agenda tonight, this is not a new project. This is a project that went from start to finish at master plan, preliminary plan, a final plan that was approved in February of 2022, approving a solar facility on a portion of this 36 or so acre lot. What happened after that, a quirk of permitting, the CRMC review for this project. CRMC managed the drainage. This was not a DEM project. That comes after the local approval is granted, not before. So they won't review it until afterwards. By the time we got to the building permit stage, CRMC had reviewed the project, came up with some tweaks to the design. These are improvements to the design, belts and suspenders. They were not necessary to the drainage program or any other aspect of the design, but they were reviewed as best practices to add to the approved plan, and they were added. Primary feature were some stone, relocated stone trenches associated with the drainage. The original design had contemplated that stone trenching would be something that would occur at the drip line of the solar panels. That was not consistent with the CRMC and more advanced statewide analysis of the issue. They wanted to see the drainage ditches reoriented, not to be at a drip line, but to more effectively capture drainage in the facility. So it was an enhancement. The drainage calculations for the project, everything was presented at the approval stages, master and preliminary. The drainage design was such to ensure that there would be no net increase in the rate or velocity of water flowing off the site. That's the design standard. These trench reorientations in relation to the solar panels were not necessary to achieve that design standard. CRMC felt they would be useful as belts and suspenders in case you had an extraordinary rain events. So those changes were made in the field. They were a normal part of the building permit process because they were introduced by a later permitting authority and were benign. They were not viewed in the normal practice here as something that would go back to the planning board. That's something that was confirmed in the staff report, that they really shouldn't have had to come back to the planning board. But we do understand that there are downstream areas, and the road area of West Shore Road has had some historic drainage issues. Any place that has had historic drainage issues are experiencing them in spades this spring. I think we all know that. We do recognize that there are persons in this general area that are concerned about drainage issues, and that the matter was elevated not because it was a significant modification, but because there was significant public interest in the area. We've since, and there has been some work done in a downstream area subject to seasonal flooding, some swale and berm work that was done as part of farming operations without state permits below our property. This is the area that is not impacted any more than it was before by reason of the drainage design. But that area has been modified. There may have been some modifications amongst homeowners as a result of flooding conditions in recent years with or without permits. But we do recognize that there are some things going on downstream that the science doesn't point to our development as causing, but that are issues of concern to you and our neighbors. So we, in a gesture of good faith, are inclined here to support the direction of staff toward an independent review of the drainage on this project by PAR Engineering. I don't know if that work has commenced yet. I know that as of Monday of this week, the engagement of PAR was still in progress. This is a science issue here. This is a technical issue here. There's no doubt that folks have complaints about drainage concerns. We're very confident that that's not anything that results from these minor enhancements that were made to the drainage program on our project. But we are certainly willing to work with our engineer to put our engineer together with their engineer and try to get another set of eyes on what's going on here. And we're happy to cooperate in that process. I think people should be able to say what they want to say at these hearings. We just had an example of that on your first full application. So we think it would be helpful for people to be able to say, but at the end of the day, it's going to be an engineering issue here as to how, if at all, our upland properties are capable of managing better than they already are that drainage situation. So unless there, I would like to present as part of our presentation, Lynn Small, our project engineer. I think you're familiar with her, and she can introduce herself and her qualifications. I think you perhaps would recognize her as someone who's qualified as an engineer and that appears before this board and others. She's just come here from another hearing in Middletown and arrived a few moments ago. But I would like her to be permitted to introduce herself and to address two things for you. One is the nature of the changes that were made in the field and the benign nature of those changes, and those changes having a positive impact on the drainage in the area as opposed to a negative impact, a belts and suspenders positive impact. And also to just underscore that the re-reviewed drainage calculations for this project are such that there is no net increase in the rate or volume of runoff from the solar facility downstream, and that whatever issues are occurring there are not the result of this solar project that's been already approved and built. And as part of that, she is prepared to also address, some suggestions with respect to some berming that's been done downstream of our project in this area subject to seasonal flooding. It looks like it was a good faith effort to try to address some drainage issues downstream of us. The berm that was created doesn't appear to be correctly aligned to the drainage, and that correction could have a positive impact in what's happening below us. So if I may, I'd like to have Ms. Small address those issues as concisely as she can.
If I could, just so we're clear, it's not possible that the original calculations were wrong, and based on those calculations, if you hadn't done the DEM or CRMC's stuff, it's possible, or you're saying it's not possible that you were sure telling us that CRMC stuff did not cause this.
Yes.
And CRMC was basing their calculations on the original calculations.
No, they do their own analysis. I didn't mean to cut your question
No,
short.
no,
Were you
I-
finished?
I just want
Okay.
to understand, because if this third party that's gonna come in, if it comes back and determines that it was just wrong calculations, the calculations maybe weren't updated for as things are changing that needed to be changed, you guys will certainly recognize that. But the downhill part that you were saying, who were those people that own that and that did that act of the berm?
Well, the berm was actually constructed by the owner of the property, Carnegie Trails LLC. They're the owner of the underlying property. Our client is leasing a portion of that for the solar facility. So they're, and I don't want to speak for that person. Mr. Chappelle is here. I don't think we want to get into an argument with that person here tonight. I think whatever was done there was done in a genuine attempt to try to address the situation. I think our technical position through our engineer is it could have been done better. And we suspect that our engineering will affirm that. And we certainly expect that they'll look at our drainage calculations, and we expect that an engineering firm like that, we're very familiar with them. I've worked with them for years, both of these firms. There usually isn't a big difference as to where they come out on drainage calculations, but that's something that remains to be seen through the independent review.
But this berm was created after the initial claim that
Yes.
the water coming from the solar field made things worse on their property. In response to that, the owners of the property, Carnegie Trails,
Yes.
made this attempt to mitigate the problem. And
Yes.
and I'm sure the neighbors will say it might have made it a little better, but it certainly hasn't stopped the problem.
Yeah, I think
I'm
that probably
guessing.
all is true
Yeah.
as to what people will say. And there have been other efforts to try to address these issues downstream as well. It's not just Carnegie Trails that has done that. And these folks are farmers, and we're not saying these are rogue efforts, but they certainly weren't done with the benefit of any engineering analysis. What my client did was done with the benefit of engineering analysis. It passed muster before this board. It passed muster before CRMC, and we came out with an even improved. And CRMC didn't second guess the calculations. They were simply suggesting a better technique of how drainage ditches get oriented to the panels. That was the only material change that occurred.
I'm sure no one believes that it was done with ill intent.
Oh, of course not. It wasn't our idea. It was the regulator.
Obviously, that's the case.
Yes, it was described as an evolving best practices. The whole solar business in Rhode Island has come a long way since the initial designs in so many ways. I'm sure you've seen them here. And the way to orient the drainage facilities best to the panels has been one of the things that's improved. Wow. Wow.
I would say, what the hell is going on?
You don't get hail very often.
Let's
Continue on,
give it a
Luke.
moment.
We have a long night. Please move forward.
Yeah. I guess we can either turn up the volume and
I can't.
pretend like this is going on, or see if we got a minute.
I keep my card.
I know, me too.
Yeah, let's check what. You checking our weather forecast?
Looks like it's just.
Yeah, it looks like it's quieting down now.
This is supposed to be over quickly. Hard to hear.
Yeah. I think we're doing good.
Better.
Yes.
Okay,
Please continue.
if I may, Ms. Small, please.
Good evening. Lynn Small, Northeast Engineer, 6 Valley Road.
Guess, I'll make a quick motion to accept Lynn Small as a professional registered engineer.
Thank you.
Okay, we've gotten the two motions. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Please continue.
Thank you. We went through this project a few years ago, with master plan, preliminary and final. And then following your approval, as with all developments in the state, we have to get the town approval before we can go to CRMC. So once we had this town approval, we went to CRMC. This happened to be the first project that my office worked on after the state issued their design guidelines for the solar projects. That's the reason why we made the error in showing the trenches running parallel with the solar panel rows instead of with the topography. But if you think about it from an engineering standpoint, running this trenches parallel with topography makes more sense if you're trying to slow the flow down, because it will act as more like a level spreader type situation. So the stormwater will come down, hit the stone path area, some will infiltrate into the trench, and when it's filled up, it'll overfill. If you have it running across a gradient, it's going to go into that trench, run down the slope of the trench, and then all spill out at the end. So that obviously concentrates the flow instead of spreading it out, which is the intent. So that was the change that was made between the last time we went over this project with you and during the state review with the engineers at CRMC. And I hope I've explained that in a way that you can understand that it is very insignificant. We didn't take into credit in our drainage designs the stone trenches at all. So the fact that they were changed was completely irrelevant to the end number. It would result in simply an improvement in how you sheet flow across the site. With that said, I just want to give you a lot more background on this project so that you have everything in front of you when you're listening to abutters and anyone else who might testify before you. My office worked on this development since 2005 or 8. It was formerly the Alban Yachts property. If you were to look at the existing conditions plans that we included in the original submission to the town, you'll notice that existing conditions plan was the survey done for the Alban Yachts property. But when we came in front of you, the site had already been undergoing different iterations of demo. Not completely demoed, but the building was not there, but it is on our plan because that's when we did that survey. So it's a very old base survey that we had done. It wasn't a ground survey, it was a flown survey. Back in 2005 or 8, when that was done, it was done by an airplane. Now you might do an aerial survey by a drone or something that's a little bit more accurate, but back then it was by aerial. And like I said, it was very much out of date. Then, as you may recall, this project had been owned by Alban Yachts. Then the building was demoed. Parts of the parking lot were removed, stockpiled on site. It went into receivership and the site was dormant for years. Okay, and it was just left with stockpiles and at an incomplete level of demolition. It didn't have erosion control protection. Okay, it was just left. The gates are closed and that's where it sat. And because the loans, I believe, were owned outside the country, it took even longer than a normal project takes to come out of receivership. Court Chappelle's group was able to get it out because their office was very tenacious and had the resources to be able to do it. So thankfully, the project ended up going forward. And I think it was 2001 when we started this project. Now we used the existing conditions plans that we had. The building was demoed. We saw that this parking area was demoed. Nothing substantial was done or built that would result in a significant change in the topography other than stockpiles had been placed on the site and left for years on end. So we felt it was pretty good to use. Although if we could start over, we might redo it, just to be safer than sorry. But with that said, this is where we are. So we did the development based on the topography that we had. We put the panels on based by the solar group they had talked with the property owner and came up with, this is the area we want the panels. These are the setbacks based on the town's ordinance and what their agreements are. They gave us the footprint. We inserted that into our drawings, and then we did the designs from there. Now, with solar projects, a really nice way of mitigating your stormwater is to let it have a meadow that grows. So meadow is basically grasses that grow and they get to be a foot or so tall. You end up with wildflowers in them. You end up with good bee activity. They don't have to be mowed regularly. It's a low maintenance, a really attractive and an extremely good way of mitigating stormwater. In fact, a very thick meadow will actually reduce your runoff more than a like a treed property that doesn't have a thick underbrush. So a lot of places where you have trees that you can kind of walk through them and it's not all brambles, you're going to get faster runoff through that area than you would from an established meadow. So that's our drainage design, where these trenches that we're going to help mitigate and enhance sheet flow, and these meadow grasses. We've done it on other projects since, and it is a good practice to have in place. We do propose in this package that you have seen to correct those stone trenches that we found. We did the as-built conditions plan, and then when we were putting the package together for the town, we realized, hey, some of those trenches are not built parallel to the topography. And it's not because the contractor did anything particularly wrong, per se. The topography was slightly off because of the longevity of the demo, if you will, and how it sat. So there were some slight tweaks in the topography. They softened some things up, but what they didn't do was realign the trenches according to the topography changes. They just put them where we had them on the plan. So when the topography changed slightly, now the trench goes the wrong direction. So those are going to be fixed. That's one of our proposals as part of this meeting. If you approve the project and the minor modifications, afterwards, we will go back and fix those trenches for the property. Now, as far as the drainage reports are concerned, we do have the drainage reports. They have been reviewed by the CRMC. The planner has recommended that we have a third-party reviewer. So I believe the package that the third-party reviewing engineering firm might want to review would be the plans that were assented by CRMC with that drainage report, as well as the modification set that's submitted to you, which represents the as-built conditions with the minor revisions to the stone trenches so that they better follow the topography of the site as it ended up on an as-built condition. So that is an as-built survey that you see on our modification site. That was a new drone topography. So that is accurate information. And those revisions should result in a better situation. With that said, the peak runoff from this property still proposes a reduction in the runoff. Like, even with the trenches going the wrong direction, when you get to the end of the site, it's still a reduction because of the change in the surface is now not compacted gravel or not asphalt or not a several acre building, but in fact, grasses that will and have already established well, and are every year they'll slow it down a little bit more. Grass, as you know, gets thicker over time, so you don't end up with 100% thick lawn once you put that hydro seed down, you know, and for what it's worth and what's important to put on record or make sure that you're aware of, every project that we do in Rhode Island or any state, the engineering design takes existing conditions and then it takes proposed conditions. But there's a period between when you're in construction and when you're establishing those final vegetation goals of your proposed conditions where you're catching up. So your runoff rates adjust over time. For example, if I was doing a project and it was just a single family house, right? You build the house and you would model that yard as grass. We wouldn't model it as dirt until March 31st. You know, it's modeled as grass, but it's understood that that grass comes over time. In between, you put your erosion controls in place so the dirt doesn't get washed into the streets. And sometimes the contractor has to come down, you know, a time or two to, you know, reseed an area because it's eroded over time. But that is something that happens for every project, regardless of its use, that I've ever worked on. Unless it's 100% asphalt parking lot, then I guess you have your drainage from day one. But that is a condition of engineering design, and it is a regular practice that's just an accepted situation. Now, after we were contacted and told that there was neighbor concerns with runoff and how it was increased, first we made sure everyone's aware, you know, when you're in construction, there is going to be an increase in runoff, and we do the best you can to put a temporary measure in place, your erosion controls in place and whatnot. But I do get calls, and I know the town gets calls on almost every project. I've been insulted beyond what you can imagine. I've received video texts by, you know, abutters over the weekend, not for this particular project, but others. It just happens. That's what happens. They've told me I was terrible and a liar and they thought I was crazy. And then after it's all done, 9 times out of 10, it's fine. And also 9 times out of 10, they don't tell me. But a few times I've been told you were right, you know, because after everything's established, then you end up with what your goalposts were, you know. So when we heard that there was drainage issues with the neighbors, my office went down and there is an ASSF that's located. Leah, can you pull up the plan? Is that possible?
Sure. Give me a second. I had gotten another presentation ready.
Oh, sorry. It's like, oh,
Lynn, can I ask the question that when the third party comes in, will the neighbors that have suffered the consequences have the opportunity to meet with them so they don't just get a one-sided version of that? So when the report comes out, they're gonna feel like they had a chance. Because I got a feeling, at least if I was one of those neighbors, if you brought in 12 engineering firms and you didn't get a chance to talk to them and show what you had as a problem, they're not gonna believe it.
I mean, that really depends on the town's process. In most towns, the third-party reviewing engineer provides their review and comments, and then we work with the TRC and we adjust all of, if there's any adjustments to make with the designs, to create a plan set that makes the third-party reviewer and the town officials feel comfortable. They provide a recommendation to the board, and that is usually where it goes from there. I don't know if the process in Portsmouth brings the third-party reviewer to testify. I've had that happen a few times, but not very often. Usually it's a roundtable discussion. We fix all the issues and then we come back with the final product. Engineers, our code of ethics, we work for the good of the environment. It's not per client, you know, like our client is irrelevant. We're working in the best practices, you know, so it's not like an attorney, and I'm not even saying anything bad about attorneys, but they're working for their client. You know, engineers have a code of ethics that we're working for the law, the best practices regardless of our clients. So that because of that code of ethics, I guess, and then you have the third party reviewer and the town officials, usually it works out that way, but that is really up to you. I think you have the ability to ask that the third party reviewer come to the meeting if you want. Okay, so Leah has brought up the plan for you, and just outside at the top of the page, there's a wetland, and you can see the little flags right there. And there's an ASSF that runs through that wetland. An ASSF is basically a ditch, okay? It's an area subject to storm flowage. That's the technical term. That ASSF in 2005 or 8, when we did the original design, directed west. When we went out and did the survey, after we found out the neighbors were upset or suggesting that we were flooding West Shore Road and all this, which we knew our numbers demonstrated and all the information we had suggested that is not true, you know, so we went outside the scope, the fence line, and double checked. That now goes towards West Shore Road. So that ASSF over time has changed direction. I am speculating, but I believe it's a result of the decade where the site was in the middle of demo and we had exposed materials, some stockpiles. It's immediately downgrading of where those parking lots were that were kind of demoed, but not fully demoed with stockpiles over there. So it's possible that rainstorm after rainstorm after rainstorm, it goes into the ditch, it creates a high spot. Now the water starts going the other way. That is what I believe is resulting in, during, at least during construction of what the concern was for the stormwater. Since then, we did a separate analysis for our stormwater after we found out this condition exists, just to make sure, because if you look at our original drainage report that we did and got permitted through CRMC, we had that going that way, because that's the way it was supposed to go. So we had it all going west. If you look at our watershed plans, there's a small section that goes to West Main Road, but most of the site goes to that bigger coastal feature. So what we did is we took the information of the as-built ASSF, reran our drainage calculations. And now, again, we have existing prior to construction versus proposed. You know, everything's constructed with the ASSF heading towards West Shore Road, and it still reduces the peak runoff. So, but I suspect a lot of the concerns that the neighbors may have been having was that transition period between when you start construction and when you get the site fully established.
So what's the time frame for when you say, okay, we've planted the grass, we've got all those things in place? How long before it's fully grown and that this problem should have stopped by this date?
Or is
And if we-
considered established.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that leads us into a good segue. We have photos of the site, as of what, today, this week? Did you give those? Did you give those to Leah?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. And, oh. Here we go.
So then the abutting neighbors, if let's just say, because March was the second wettest March in recorded history.
Well, there's one important thing to remember is no drainage design eliminates runoff. Okay, our measure is what was there existing versus what's proposed. The storms we've gotten today even are crazy compared to what we had 10 years ago. So just by the nature of the type of storms and the severity of them, you know, you see more water today than you saw 15, 20 years ago. As in 2010, The state of Rhode Island changed the stormwater regs and they increased all the storms. The rates of runoff that we have to accommodate have all changed. So it's not, no one's denying that. It's just important for people to remember, if you have a flooding issue today, it's gonna be worse in 5 years, even if no one does anything, because the rain's getting more, you know? So there's some personal responsibility that I've had to put a new driveway in on my own house because I was getting flooding. So, I mean, you have to, there's some things you have to do. With that said, let's move to the photo so you can see what the site looks like today. So we have the grasses established. It's early May, so not everything is 100%. That's a good overview of the entire panel area. This is taken from basically over Carnegie Heights, facing over. And this one faces a little bit more west or north. I think that's Mount Hope Bridge you see in the background. So you can see the vegetation is coming in. And it's thickening every year. Just the basic fact of when you mow your lawn, you leave those clippings down, that's basically seeds that help thicken it up. So this is thicker than it was last year when I was here. And I think Leah could testify to that herself. She was out there doing a site walk. But we have a few more that show that the grasses are coming in. This is between the panels. You can see it's pretty well established. There's still areas where it's gonna thicken up even more, you know, but I believe it's, you know, this isn't in the middle of construction at all. This is a site that has established vegetation. You're not having an erosion situation. What you're having is, you know, gradual additional thickening of the vegetated growth. There's no areas where we're concerned that there's no vegetation. So this, like I said, will continue to thicken over time with every season and rainstorm that we have.
That surface area is not like a parking lot either. That's impervious surface. You have pervious surface below. It's going to sheet and run off, but at the end of the day, it's not as extensive, the mitigations you need nearly, right, as a impervious building or parking.
Correct. I mean, you're right. Part of the project was beyond just establishing meadow grasses and everything, is we removed asphalt and changed it to grass. So you had a reduction in your runoff from that as well. Those are erosion control measures, and they kind of biodegrade in place. So you don't need to take them out necessarily. You can, but not that kind. Those are very heavy to move.
And so and just to clarify, you reoriented the drainage, a big part of why we're here. That was from what was approved to more effectively capture the runoff, but it was really at the behest of what DEM told you to do.
Yeah, so, and what's important to say is that the part that we reorientated was just those stone trenches that help improve the sheet flow type of action that you get, so that the runoff's kind of coming more uniformly. The runoff rates should not have changed at the end of the fence line just because of those trenches. But yes, it's important that they do get fixed. I'm not saying not to, but the project would not work properly if we installed it the way all those trenches were when you saw it. But the way that we got it permitted through the state with the CRMC review is the proper way for those to be installed.
What you're showing with the vegetation, saying it's still coming in thicker, so it sounds like it's not even considered fully established, like it's gonna be, it takes a few years to get to that final state.
It does, but what I don't want the board to feel like like you don't hold back occupancy permits until you have 100% grass established for a house, you know? So, oh, okay. Yeah, so that was what we wanted to make sure you're aware of. The goals when you're doing a review of a project to make sure that you're not gonna have any adverse impacts is if there's huge areas of bare earth that are eroding into neighborhood properties or into town roads, that's something that you would address before you sign off fully on a project. But the thickening of grasses is not one of them. The fence line that you see there is the perimeter of the project. The other side, that's not part of the solar project. That's outside the perimeter of the solar project. I believe that's just west of the fence.
That's the stone.
Yeah, that's all just.
That's a stone gravel pit or whatever.
That's the gravel driveway that was, that's outside the fence line and not part of the, design or the project.
So how much longer for the neighbor's sake, before the vegetation is in full place with the hope that will stop whatever the problem is? Not guaranteed.
So the vegetation is in place and they should be not experiencing an increase in runoff from this project, not within the solar fence line of the project. Like I said, there could be other things that are, that they're feeling, that swale's going the wrong way. The solar project itself still has a reduction in the peak runoff by the time we get to that fence line. So, and into that swale. So I can conclusively say, and I am hoping our third-party engineer backs us on it. I mean, if they don't, then we'll look at our numbers again, but we already had it reviewed by the state agency who had their engineers review it. So we use the general engineering practices for every project. So I don't think there are any issues with it, but I know the board will feel better if they have a second party just to say the same thing I am.
Do you have anybody else that you want to bring up, or actually does anybody on the board have any questions? Small.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Yes, that's acceptable for now. Just reserving.
Yep.
In case something comes up while
Yep.
others speak.
No, but she did a good job explaining it, so.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak towards this? Mr. DeAndrea?
Good evening, Donato Andre DeAndrea. I own the, excuse me? Oh, residence, office address 8 Madeline Drive in Newport. I am the owner of the property on West Shore Road, furthest to the south, but one. And it's been in the family since the 1950s. And it's still in the family and still, I have my son living there at the present time. My only message to the board is that I have absolutely no objection to this project going forward.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Name and address, please.
Good evening. My name is Linda Lapointe, and I live at 296 West Shore Road, right on the corner of West Shore Road and Baker Road. Mine is the big, tall, gray house. You probably have recognized it in your walks. I've seen many of you down there. Anyway, my husband, my late husband, and I purchased the lot of land on the corner in 1994 and finished completing our house in 1995. So I've lived there, I'm sorry, still say we. I have lived there for 29 years in July. And I just, mention has been made of the swales that are surrounding my home. And I'd just like to clarify a couple of points. When we purchased that lot of land, we were very sensitive to the drainage issues in that neighborhood. We realized that there were no storm drains, and we were told there would never be any because it was a summer community. And because of our sensitivity, my husband, who was an engineer, consulted with CRMC on multiple occasions and came up with a plan, a landscape plan that we felt would enhance the property, but would also contribute to controlling the water that would have been absorbed by our property before we had cleared it. I mean, after, once we cleared it, we realized that there would be more of a water issue. So with CRMC's help, as I said, we consulted with them. We opted to leave the rear 30 feet of our property untouched. So it has all the original vegetation, weeds, vines, trees, and that holds back a great deal of water. It has for almost 29 years. The swales, which I had no idea what a swale was until my husband came up with this whole design, has held back thousands of gallons of water over the years. And anyone who's lived in the neighborhood, and there are multiple people here who have lived for quite a while, can attest to that fact. The swales rarely overflowed. Occasionally, when the snow would melt, we might have some overflowing. And I actually enjoyed watching the birds take their bath in the little swale. Well, now I have ducks. I have never had ducks in my yard before, but because of the increased drainage down West Shore Road, I occasionally have a family, I believe they're mallards, they could be mergansers, I'm not sure, but they're swimming in my swales. That's how much water I am holding back. Now, fortunately, we have an excellent septic system with a large field in the front of the house, and that absorbs a great deal of the water, and the area is dry. Now, again, I've lived there for 29 years, and I have never seen this much water until the last 2.5 years. And what's changed in the neighborhood? I agree. This has been the second wettest March in the area since they've been actually keeping records. So that has contributed to the water. But also, as soon as the solar farm construction began, it wasn't bad at first. However, I have noticed more water beyond the 30 feet of vegetation. It's actually coming into a grassy area of my backyard near where I have my blueberry bushes in one of my gardens. Again, my swales are filled, and I just want to clarify the fact that I believe the swales did their job for 27 years, and now they're still holding back a great deal of water, but they're not enough. I'm actually seeing water flow into the swales from Baker Road. Now, I never saw that before. So where is that water coming from? I have bayberry bushes and Rosa rugosa planted in the front, which also help to absorb the water. The water is pooling around them. I've never seen that before. So, again, I'm not an engineer. I just have, I think, a good eye for detail and observation. And a lot of these problems seem to coincide with the construction of the solar farm. And I understand that the trenches are going to be modified in some way, and I appreciate that. But I don't understand where this water is supposed to go. If the water is flowing in the trenches, where does it end up? Is it supposed to be absorbed by the land? I know the vegetation will help, but ultimately, isn't water supposed to have a path to some kind of final drainage area? That's my question. Thank you.
Maybe Lynn Small wants to address that.
If you feel like you need to. Lynn?
Sure. So there's two things to answer on that statement, I believe. You have the type of vegetation, the type of ground surface contributes to how much water or runoff is infiltrating. So if you have a thicker type of vegetation, it slows the water down, allows more to infiltrate into the ground. And that's how we measure the runoff. When I say, you know, a meadow is going to slow and have a reduced runoff rate than, you know, compacted gravel or asphalt or even your own lawn. Okay, so that's the answer to that question. The vegetation slows the rain down so it can infiltrate into the ground. Evidence, you have growth. You know, if you're not having growth, then you're not having infiltration. The stone trenches are kind of like a belt and suspenders to help additionally slow the water down. They're at least a foot deep, and they will fill up and infiltrate. So that water, once they're fixed, so they're going parallel with the ground, the water will stay in them and they'll infiltrate. So you'll have additional infiltration. Right now, because some of them are sloping, you're getting more spillage. You're getting still some infiltration because the bottoms, you know, you're going all the way down to the bottom, so it's not just spilling out like a pipe. But when we fix some of them, there'll be even more stone trench infiltration that you'll get.
Just for my own sake, you know, the maintenance of retention, detention ponds, they have on a regular basis have to be cropped down, make sure that silt isn't building up. They have to keep the original depth. Do these berms sort of kind of fill in themselves and don't have the ability like they were first built, or are the berms still the same? And
The stone trenches?
yeah,
Yeah, so we do have an operation and maintenance document that's required for any state stormwater design. And that is part of this project. So there will be, you're right, they could fill up with sediments. It'll be very slow, with a good vegetation, uphill from it, because you don't have a lot of erosion, when you have full establishment of soils. And I know during construction, they had filter fabric over the tops to minimize any infiltration of sediments during the construction process. So that's another point that might be made too. I mean, I know the neighbors experienced really bad stormwater situations when we had these really hard rainstorms, but we were in construction a large portion of that time. So even these features that we had already in place that should have been helping, they were being protected with erosion control, so they weren't working to their 100%, you know. Those stone trenches are exposed now, so the water is able to go right into them. And after we fixed the few that we found that weren't orientated to the best, we'll have even more of an improvement.
anybody else? Again, name and address.
Bill Collins, 37 Baker Road, Portsmouth. I've lived here for 36 years. I winter here, not just summer. I can honestly say that when Albin was running that property, we never had a problem until they tanked and they went into receivership. Their methodology for taking care of the water runoff was to put dirt berms along West Shore Road and redirect the water back onto those properties that go onto Mrs. LaPointe's property. They also had, at one point, a pumping system which dealt with water runoff on those parking lots. And I mean, I guess 90% of that property was paved over anyway. So they had to do something with the water because otherwise they'd be floating in it as well. But in 2010, when we had those historic floods, I can remember remarking to my wife, I'm looking out my second floor window and they had cut down and burned most of the vegetation that was on that property. And we had a clear shot right into where they had the hull flotation test site that they had on site. And you could see a pond, which would actually probably be better described as a mini lake on that property, where it was just full of water. And we had water problems all the time for several months thereafter. That was the first time, by the way, that I saw Mrs. LaPointe's swales getting inundated with water. And like I say, I've been there 36 years, and we've seen a lot of things go on. We know when their pump broke down, that was the only time you really have a bad water problem. But lately, we see nothing but water problems. Particularly, I appreciate the comment about Ms. Small talking about the use of vegetation to control the water runoff. It's a great way of doing it. However, it doesn't work very well during the winter when everything's dead. So that, and consequently, I mean, we did have an incredibly prolific amount of water this past winter. And there were no plants to absorb it or try to control the water runoff. There was also no means to pump it off the property to take it to its final resting place. I'm a geologist. I can tell you that water has to go somewhere. Otherwise, we can talk about diverting it here, diverting it there, but it's still got to go somewhere because gravity always wins. And when you're down at a lower level, and there's a very persistent pitch to those parking lot areas that right off of West Shore Road. And there used to be a ditch that ran through there that intercepted the water that was coming down from the more easterly parking lot. It would fall into that and it would be drawn away, and then water would pitch off and go onto those properties parallel to Baker Road. But that was only half the water. And Albany had to deal with it as well. They needed that property. They couldn't be dealing with water piling up all over the place all the time. That's why they pumped it. But when they went into receivership, they turned it off, and we were left to deal with that. The other thing I'd like to point out, when Albany was negotiating, I guess they were at one point they were going to put a housing development on the property. Right, Woodmeister. And they essentially delaminated the entire parking lot area, and they made two incredibly large cones of asphalt. When that asphalt was removed, when the property was developed for the solar farm, but the solar farm, I mean, because of the fact they delaminated it and just shoved it all up into a big pile, the persistent pitch of that property was still present. So when they removed 1 inch of a uniform 1 inch, say, of asphalt from that property, they still had to level that property out. Once you level that property out, no matter what you put on it, if it's permeable to water, it's going to get into that fill that's below it. And I can bet you any amount of money that the parking lot, when they delaminated the asphalt on that parking lot, there was an underlayer there that was impermeable to water. So as a consequence, when it rains, it fills that area with water. That water has to go somewhere, but it can't penetrate below to get into the water table. But what it can do is it can be confined by that area that's covered by tar, oil, or whatever, and this material that they put on the top, and it still flows downhill. Gravity always wins. So you can have these devices to direct the water somewhere, but you still have to deal with that reservoir, and you're creating a reservoir when you backfill like that against an impermeable membrane. The water can't penetrate it. So it's just going to charge that full of water, and then whatever can't go into that layer is just going to run off. So effectively, all it does is it delays the action, because that as that layer gets full of water, it takes a bit of time to do that. Once it's full, it's got nowhere to go, and it just rolls off. Those properties are ready to accept that water or not, or to deal with it. Joe Duffy lived at 2 Hall Road. He used to put up a berm He was out there building a berm up on his property, trying to divert the water because it was taking a beeline down West Shore Road onto his property. And it was just a road in his property. And my complaint is I don't get any water per se from this property that I'm concerned about. I don't have a basement. When we built, we knew that there were water problems to begin with out on Baker Road, and they didn't have storm drains and all that sort of stuff. But what I'm concerned about is when we have water during the winter that fills that swale and it starts to spin out onto the roadbed. We've been lucky for the past couple of years. We haven't had really cold winters. But if you get a really cold winter in January or in early February, you could have a flash freeze of that, and that road curves hard. And some people don't come down that road very slowly. They come down that, they're easily cooking 50 miles an hour sometimes, and they make a turn. If they have ice, Doug's gonna have somebody visiting them.
Yep. All right,
Anyway.
thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Anybody else? Me.
Hi, I'm a full-time resident, Martha Mendoza at 69 Baker Road. And for the record, I've never had any water except for after the solar farm. It's going straight into my garage and in my basement. So now I have dark circles in my garage, and it's musty and I can't get it to dry. So now I have a problem with how to fix it. So I do know where part of the water's going. It's going straight into my garage and into my basement. So I hope somebody can do something about that. I would love to be involved with these third-party engineers to let them see what is happening. It's going straight into my my driveway now is the shell driveway. But I'm going to have to refill the shell driveway because it's starting to get like a little trenched right into my driveway. And we did have a very cold spell in January, and my driveway was a complete sheet of ice. So it's not only, you know, dangerous, but it does happen. So hoping somebody can just do the right thing and get this done, because I've already have to spend money on pressure washer. I'm gonna have to fix my garage, you know, some power, some stripping. It's just me, so I don't know what to do. But I'm trying to do my best, and it's gonna cost me some money, and I would like somebody to just take care of it and do the right thing.
I would suggest giving your name to them, just to ask when the third party comes that you.
And who's that?
It would be, well, would it be?
We're still working on that. We're working with the applicant.
Okay. Well, I'm hoping that my name is on this list now, so if we can use this list, I could be part of it.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Kathleen, did
Oh,
you say
any
something,
questions?
Mrs. Wilson?
Do you know what lot you are on?
69 Baker would be. Awesome.
Map 16, lot 5.
So Leah,
Yes.
this request for modification to the final. Was, did I get interrupted?
There's other people that would like
Oh, I'm
to,
sorry.
like to speak, and one of them is virtually dialed in, if you don't mind
Oh,
just
sure.
finishing
Sorry.
up with, abutters. Okay, I'm gonna elevate Mark Hall. Mark, I've just elevated you and you can now make your presentation. Mark, can you hear us?
There we go.
Good evening, Mark. We can see you. Can you hear us?
Can't hear you.
Can you unmute? Is it *6?
I can't hear you.
Mark, dial *6 to unmute. I believe he's dialing in from Maine. Maybe his Wi-Fi is not good. The suggestion was made, Mark, to turn off your video and just talk if you're dialing in from Maine. Now dial *6 to unmute. Maybe while Mark is doing that, we'll have
Someone else?
somebody else.
Anybody? Yeah, if there's nobody else, please, Court.
Court Chappelle. I am the abutter with my wife across the street, 80 Evans Way. It's my daughter that lives on the corner, kitty corner from the La Pointes. And with Jamie Benacasa, we own the balance of the land known as Carnegie Trails. Precarious position. These are my neighbors. For precarious position, this is our tenant. We're not trying to create problems. Most times a lawyer is not going to sit up here in front of you and admit that there's something wrong. There's something wrong. Maybe it's the most historic rain we've had. Maybe it's the vegetation that's not done. But they're not crazy because I have lived there for 24 years. And I know that the swale that the La Pointes put in always did a nice job. Clearly, sometimes it went over. But the issue isn't whether there was a problem before. It's the days and frequency and how bad the problem is now. And the issue is whether this is contributing to it. I appeared at the TRC the other day and was kind of shocked, I get it, that the swale that was supposed to go west they thought runs east. I found that out early when everybody started complaining, and I'm not an engineer, but I've got these very technical devices called ping pong balls. And I walked into the stream that was running to a degree that I could have kayaked down it, and I dropped them, and one went east and one went west. So I can tell you exactly where that swale that takes water to the west began and exactly where it went to the east. And I am guilty as sin of trying to, on the backside of that fence, give my neighbors some relief with me and my farmer backhoe trying to dig a trench. So the question to me is, and I'll wait for PAR Engineering to tell us, but I want to tell you, I'm going to be asking them some questions that are a little different than those posed. To me, it's not the standard of we didn't increase the runoff, because that's not what the landlord negotiated. And that's not what we came here to the planning board was. We came with a plan and said this was going to make it better. And if they modify it and it's better or equal, God bless you, vote 7-0. But if it's not better, we shouldn't be modifying it until we know that it is. And if we can't determine whether it's better until the vegetation is fully in, then don't modify it until it's fully in. Will you be kind enough to bring up the final plan?
The final approved plan that was approved
The
in
final approved-
November 2023.
Yes. And then go to page 5, which is the drainage that you approved. Again, I'm not an engineer, but I'm going to tell you what I'm going to ask. They drew a plan and they drew the drainage trenches, and they gave you a detail of those trenches. Those trenches are 2 feet deep and 1 foot wide. And they put them basically at the base of almost every solar panel. And they actually wrote the distance and the length of each one of those. And the distance of the length, I took out my little calculator and I added them up. 13,266 linear feet of drainage ditch. They then went to coastal and they put in about 6 drains. And they also were kind enough to give us the distance on all of those. 2,121 linear feet. That's 19% of what was approved. Now you can tell me they're better because the drainage plan still has them 2 feet by 1 feet, except for one that is along next to the pool. That one is 4 feet by 1 and it's 270 feet long. And I counted it twice because I thought if there was 4 feet wide instead of 2 feet wide, I should give them credit for that. So I just want to know from an engineer, because when you're a lawyer, you got 5 friends that are electricians and 5 friends that are plumbers and 5 friends that are engineers. So it's a loaded question I'm going to ask Mr. Parr, but I do not possibly understand how you can take 13,266 linear feet of drainage ditch down to just about 2,200 foot of drainage ditch and tell me it doesn't matter. Because I'm going to tell you, if you have been there and if it is raining, you have seen me. I go and have pictures of every rain event that exceeds 3/4 of an inch for the last 6 months. I have been there with Brian Woodhead twice. I have been there with Leah. I'm not sure Leah believed me when I said you could kayak through there. She did when she got home. She should have got hazard pay. She went out on a weekend. She left a drowned rat. It's nobody's fault, and the grass wasn't in yet. But I'm telling you, there is a ton of water that needs to be directed. I have theories of exactly how it's changed. I'll talk to an engineer. I'll show him the pictures. I'll invite any one of you to go down there with me in my photos, and I'll show you in the field what's happening, not from a desk what's happening. It just needs to be fixed. We, Jamie Benacasa and I, spent a lot of money, our savings, to save the neighborhood, not to flood them. So fix it, get it right, live happily ever after with a neighbor that doesn't have noise, doesn't have odor, doesn't have development, doesn't have traffic. They have been great for everything but the fact, talk another day about the fact that we're not supposed to see it as clearly as it is. That's another day, another question. But if we stop the water problem, we all end up good neighbors. That's all we want. But these people aren't crazy. Thank you.
we make one more attempt to come in?
Hold on a second. Mark, we're going back to you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Oh, wonderful.
There we go. My name is Mark Hall. I live on Files Farm Road in Gray, Maine. I kind of representing my mother's property, at 23 Hall Road, 33 Hall Road, and then another piece that's in between on the front of Hall Road on the water. I've been down 63 years old. I believe I've been going to Portsmouth, Rhode Island for 63 years. I remember Pearson Yachts as, you know, a paved, concreted site. I tore the buildings down 15 years ago, whenever it was. And it was still a concreted site then. I don't ever remember seeing water come off that property, even back then, seeing water pour down West Shore Road. As a kid, the property at the foot of their parking lots, all the way down to what we used to call the back road, which was opposite the end of Therian Road at the intersection of West Shore Road, that property was always a wet, mushy place year round. Better in the summer, but it was always mushy. That was a natural holding area for water, as was across the street in the fields where court developed. That was always a natural holding area for water. But water never rose out of there. Pearson's had the water going a different direction, I believe. And somehow during the course of development, the solar farm has changed markedly. The grades, stuff's running a different direction. I've never seen water pour out of a property like this. I sent Leah pictures of water coming out, and I have no idea what I'm looking at because I can't see it on my phone. But there's pictures of water pouring out, I believe, well, upwind of Linda LaPointe's house, just up the street towards the solar farm from the mailboxes. The water literally boiling out of that property and headed down West Shore Road. It gets to the point where it overflows Linda LaPointe's property, crosses West Shore Road, goes over, touches my mother's property on at the intersection between Therian and West Shore, between Therian and Hall, and then cuts across again and goes down and runs Hall Road and dumps in wherever it'll go. All the neighbors have put up asphalt berms to stop the water from running into their crawl spaces, running into their septic systems, running in everywhere. The piece of property that my mother owns down there does not have a berm on it. The water runs into the property. It's pooling in that property. I don't ever remember seeing this happen when I was a kid. We never went down to the Norman Hall lot and had to run around in puddles. I don't ever remember seeing water puddle on Hall Road. The pictures that I gave her, if she wants to put them up there, I mean, they're kind of self-explanatory. I've handed them to Court Chappelle, him being a neighbor, him being the owner of the property. I've gone up and walked the property with him. You can plant all the grass in the world. It's not going to slow that water down enough to not go somewhere. That water has to get stopped at the edge of the solar farm, held back until it naturally wants to go somewhere. Right now, it runs nonstop into Court's property, overflows his property, out onto the street, and then right down into everybody else's. In the state of Maine, if you do a development in the past 15, 20 years, if you do a development, you cannot put runoff onto somebody else's property. Doesn't matter what it costs you, you can't put runoff onto somebody else's property. Gutters, anything, you can't put it onto somebody else's property. Doesn't seem to be the case in Rhode Island. I've never seen this. It infuriates me to see this go on every day because it's ruining our lots. It's ruining everybody else's lots on Hall Road. Billy Malloy, the Moores, the Proberts, everybody's getting impacted with this water, and it's not our water. We live in a fairly flat spot. We shouldn't be expected to take this kind of water. I'm sure CRMC and DEM are not going to cough up the permits to put in storm drains from Hall Road out into the bay. I'm sure if they saw the amount of water running off the winter salty roads into the bay, they would probably have an issue with. But that's another, like Court says, it's another issue for another day. This problem's got to be addressed. The pictures I sent to Leah, kind of self-explanatory of where the water is running out up by the mailboxes. I don't know what else to say. This was never a problem before. This water was held back in somewhat of a natural basin up south or below Pearson's lower parking lot. It was held in there, kind of, it might have flown down towards their old landfill, and then out towards the bay on that end, down towards where the marina is now. But it never came up here. It never, ever came up here until this development started. Even when the parking lots were all piled full of gravel from island management or island, whoever it was, whoever's been using that lot, the water never ran out like it does now, not puking right out of there. And now it's forcing everybody else into a problem. Something needs to be done about it. The town is kind of in a spot that they've got to deal with it because they got a bunch of kind of ticked off neighbors. So I don't know what else to say, but whatever, the water needs to be intercepted at the property line or at the boundary of the solar farm, held back, and then gradually let go into the system. It's their water, not ours. But that's about all I get to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. I was providing your photos as you were speaking.
Hopefully
So
they made,
Yes.
And hopefully the third party will get to see him as well.
I,
Thank you.
like I say, and if you look at the dates on those pictures, those were from last September. A couple of them were from last May and last September. That was not this winter. That was last May and last September. So we'll skip the freakish winter storms and go to that's last year. I can remember growing up as a kid in that town, hurricanes, which we used to get. You never had rain running down that road. No matter how much rain we got, we never had it running down that road. So they got to do something to stop the water at their property line, hang on to it for a little while and then let it go. So thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, we ask if there's anybody else.
If there's anybody else that would virtually like to speak, please raise your hand.
Also one more in the audience.
Yeah.
Mike Smolik, 29 Baker Court. In between the two residents, 29 Baker Court is located in between the two. So right underneath the project. 30 seconds, very quickly. Number one, nice use of the land. My thanks to the landowners, the solar operator in the town. It's a good use of the property. So this board did the right thing. Number two, being involved with a number of the solar projects here on the island, many people don't know that at least 3 events, electrical events, occurred on 2 of the other solar farms where there were sparking from a Rhode Island Energy or National Grid, which still operates the grid. There was instant disassociation, local blackouts occurred. That hasn't happened with this project, to the best of my knowledge, because I live there. So that's a good thing. So positive for both the solar operator, the builder, the town, and the landowners. So third, this whole issue of groundwater and the hydrology. very quickly, there is a solution and it can be worked out. And since the applicant has said, gee, they may be involved or may volunteer, it was very loose. But that's the thing that may be best in this, because, you know, it's not impossible. For 1,000 years in engineering, we stop water from going through. I'm licensed in about 7 states. So that's what the board council should actually kind of latch onto here, since that would be an improvement. It is something that clearly many of the neighbors who have lived here for 30, 40 years, you know, this is not a new problem, but is not getting any better. And again, the town having a street without storm sewers, that's pretty common in the Northeast. And most towns, for legal reasons, really do have to kind of put in storm sewers at some point if they have, when the conditions occur. And clearly in this case, that's the solution to the problem. But a nice swale in the project area can really divert a lot of the groundwater. So that's maybe where we're going to be. I'll end with a quick question. This third-party engineering analysis, I can't legally ask a question here. I'm giving a very short comment and already said I'm going to be real short, but can maybe the board ask the applicant to explain who's initializing, meaning who's paying for this third-party engineer, so that we might provide good comment in this best solution? I'll stop. Thank you.
It's the applicant's responsibility to pay for it.
And I think did they mention PAR engineering is what I heard. I just lost an engineer to PAR and everything I've heard.
PAR is also one of our on-call consultants.
Okay, so everything I've heard is they're very reputable. I haven't worked with
Yes.
them directly, but they have a strong reputation. Correct.
There's no others that are dialed in that would like to speak.
Could I just ask one follow-up?
Sure.
This is for the petitioner, right? Obviously, this was a lot about stormwater runoff and stone trenches. The petition is for the modification of the final plan regarding, and it adds reduced perimeter fence, removal of pool area.
Right.
I didn't hear, was there anything to that effect? Any issues, concerns to address?
Well, my whole point is, and I was gonna ask Leah, the request for a modification to the final plan regarding a reduced perimeter fencing line, removal of pool area for the scope of the work, and adjusted stone trenches per CRMC comments. If we're waiting for a third party, wouldn't we wait for the third party's review before we would?
Right, that's not my question. Because I think the third party review is associated with the storm water runoff. It's just specifically, I didn't hear anything about the perimeter fence line or removal of pool area. I'm assuming that's not a concern.
Yeah.
All I can say is, there's an as-built, but they're just trying to put it through to get it done. I don't believe certainly the landowners have any problem. I wouldn't think the town had any problem.
Yeah.
It's just where the fences ended up. In some cases, they were put too far on one side.
So just slight deviations from the as-built and.
They worked with us to move the fences in certain cases, and we left the fences in other places. So there was a final fence line to define our lease. But
Thank you.
clearly, in my opinion, that has nothing to do with water issues or
Right.
physical layout.
No, I didn't suspect that. It just, that was part of the motion, so.
But
And then,
yeah, go ahead.
I guess, my other question, if we were to make a motion towards the third party engineer, Lee, if you'd have any recommendations, whether that should come directly back to the planning board or through the technical review board, is there any thoughts to that?
I would definitely suggest that the first step is let the third party do their due diligence and then set up a technical review committee to review whatever documentations they
That's-
have.
Okay.
But is there ever a chance like they'd come back and say, well, you need a retention or detention pond in this area, and that's what.
I don't want to speculate on what they would come up with. I would like to have them, a third party that's never looked at this before, review it and see what they find. If the drainage is staying on the property, or if there is the possibility that the drainage is going outside the perimeter.
So this request for a modification fund is simply not to talk about that we have a water problem. It's just that to make on the final as-built or whatever, that those changes that CRMC asked for or whatever were addressed to just complete what was originally asked, and that this water runoff is a totally separate issue to what's being asked for tonight. Would that be?
Yeah, I think it is a separate issue. I mean, we don't want to we don't want to not make the corrections to some of the trenches. We want the trenches to have the right orientation. So I mean, theoretically, if the board denies the modification, we're going to keep a plan in place that still works under the drainage calculations, but could work better with the reoriented stone trenches. And there's still some left to be done. That's all that's before us now. And the only technical record presented is that these enhancements are not going to cause any problem. Okay, that's the only change we're requesting to the plan. But out of a gesture of good faith, if someone wants, we think it's well past the time for having third-party review. This was an approved plan. But we recognize that there are concerns that are being raised. We think that a third party looking at this would help. I neglected to mention that we already had GZA do a report on these conditions that are being addressed, and they've made some minor suggestions. No one's suggesting that there's something significantly wrong with this drainage program, this isn't. And so there'll be a report from GZA that we can give to PAR. PAR will come up with their own points. They'll work with Lynn Small. If there's something that Mr. Chappelle can do to enhance that middle area that's downstream of us with the orientation of the berm, some things may have redirected things in new places so that water's coming out in places it wasn't coming out before. Maybe that's because someone tried to help stop the drainage and it created a new drainage pattern. Those things are all very likely. They're happening downstream of us. They're not our responsibility, but we are willing to spend some time and money here having our engineer talk to the town's engineer, present the GZA material, and just take another look at this and not ask the board to make a decision on this tonight. We're interested in not having this problem be attributed to us. We don't think it's ours, and we think the science will show that it's not our project, not our problem, but we recognize these are good businessmen. They built a good project. They don't want to have people complaining about them month after month after month for the next 5 years. Somebody other than our own engineer has got to help the board understand a little better what we're trying to say and either agree with it or not. And that's kind of where we hope to leave off, at least tonight.
But so by us, let's just say, filling your request, it doesn't say, your hands are clear of this.
Doesn't say anything until the board speaks, but I also can't say that we're acknowledging that if there is a drainage problem in this area. The testimony tonight has affirmed that there's been a drainage problem for a long time. Houses that have been built for decades were built that way. We now understand or deal with a drainage problem. So we're not required to make sure no gravity doesn't take water beyond our site. That's not the standard in Rhode Island. And I don't know that that's a standard anywhere. I don't know that that's a possible standard, that some sloping property is going to collect all of the water. Our obligation is to not increase the rate or velocity, the volume or velocity of the flow beyond existing conditions. And the existing conditions we worked on involved pavement, they involved all kinds of things that were, that are now going to be meadow. And those, there are standard calculations for determining, you know, what the volume is, the slope. They're very sophisticated equations. PAR will be very familiar with them. We're not agreeing that we're gonna fix a problem that's not our problem, but we are open to having another voice here besides ours.
It will, if they come back and just say, there are certain rules that these people had to go by, they fulfilled, they're not
Correct.
responsible. But the fact is, you're not supposed to dump water on property. The people that are living in the area are the true testimony. It doesn't matter what paper and math calculations. There never was water before. This goes in. Now there's water running down the street like it never was before.
Yeah, well, it's running down the street and that is a problem that has always occurred, that
Well, no, it sounds like by the guy from Maine, that never was a problem. And until it was done, that's the first time he ever saw that happen.
well, I don't know what he saw or didn't say, but there was an awful lot of testimony, with all due respect, that,
Yeah.
that water has been flowing beyond the solar farm limits for a very long time. And there are a lot of places in the last year or two, and I'm sure this site, while it was in construction, which accounts for most of the photographs that the gentleman from Maine took, that are completely irrelevant right now because they were done on construction conditions, not on design conditions,
So-
not even on today's condition.
Yeah. So PAR would be able to back your guy's statement up.
I would expect so, but I'm not an engineer either, and neither is court. So the lawyers are not particularly helpful here. The engineers are, and that is where we hope we're going with the next step of this.
So somebody's got to say, 2 years from now, we're not going to grow any more grass. It's as thick as it's going to get. It's met its point. If we still have a problem, things have to change. If it's stopped, then you can say, we told you so, right?
Right, right. But the design conditions and the design manual that the state developed for all of these solar projects, they assume that grass is going to take a particular time to grow. And they also know that we're in New England where the grass isn't in the same condition 12 months of the year. So we're designing to a standard that our engineers didn't make up. It's a standard best practices in the industry. There are design manuals. It's a state stormwater manual that gets updated periodically. There's new state guidelines for solar projects and best practices for getting the drainage off of the impervious panels themselves. So the experts will look at that and see what we got here in relation to what the industry standard is. And the industry standard is that you can't have, it's not that there's something wrong if there are people downstream that are experiencing water problems they're not used to seeing, because that would be true of most of the people in most of the communities of the state right now, at least for the last several months. It's an extraordinary period of time for drainage everywhere, and it's getting worse every day as it continues to rain. So
This is the poster child to say that they have to be looked at again, because clearly the current guidelines that Glenn and everybody else is subject to is not meeting today's requirements.
well, it's not, they're probably not meeting them for the last couple of weeks. They may be well exceeding them for most of the period of time. So nothing is perfect. There's always going to be a storm or an unusual event. You're on the coast here. The waves are not the same height every day, but the conditions fit a certain pattern and a certain average. And we're not going to go back and redesign all of the projects that have been designed in the last 70 years. I mean, these things get changed and updated, and we have no reason whatsoever to believe that there's anything wrong with the design of this solar project. It's going through a lot of hands.
But I 100% agree, and I don't doubt for a second that it's been by the guidelines, built according to rules,
Yeah.
which makes you not at fault. But if the rules and regulations are not adequate, somebody's got to change it.
Well, you may change the rules and regulations for future projects, and the town's in the same position as the applicant. There are roadways here without any stormwater management at all, because they were summer cottages or whatever. Nobody's asking the town yet to address their own issues here. We're the ones who had to go through a process very recently to make sure we're meeting all of the standards. Now, part of this could well be that the town's drainage design here is in part to blame for this issue, because there's no roadway stormwater management. So we're all going to look at this here. PAR's going to make some observations. My client was responsible for following the rules and designing this subdivision. And that's what we intend to continue to work in good faith to affirm. Yep.
I think what is before you folks is not an approval or denial of any sort of modification, but a motion to move forward with recommending a third-party engineer for us, for town staff, the applicants, and the property owner to figure out who to hire for a third party.
Okay, but right here, unfortunately, it doesn't say anything about a third party.
Yeah,
It's
we're-
just, what's that?
But we can make a motion, we can make a motion to postpone the modification pending.
Okay, would you like to make that motion?
If nobody else has comments. Sure.
And heard like 10 times that we're trying to get back to the standard. I'm gonna argue, and we might ask Kevin now to give you an opinion.
Court, can you
Yeah,
just
yep.
talk into the microphone?
I'm gonna argue, and we might ask Kevin to give us an opinion. I don't give a damn what the standard was. You approved a certain plan that they're trying to modify. And if you designed it or they over-designed it for a 700-year storm, then in order to modify it, PAR needs to compare what's in the ground now to what was supposed to be in the ground. Because you're not gonna go drop back to a standard that we didn't talk about. Okay, so I'm gonna ask PAR, and I hope everybody's right. Our 13,266 foot of trenches, what would they have done to the water runoff leaving this site? And now that the modification merely breaks it even from a 2006 plane ride that turned out not to be accurate, I don't care. I want to know what was the existing conditions as they proposed them? What were the proposed conditions when they were supposed to be done? And had they built the drainage system they were supposed to build, whether me and my neighbors would be flooded? And if we would, it's not their problem. I get that.
Right.
But we're not going to modify down. And logic can tell me something different, but when we go to 13,000 to 2, that's down. And if it's modified down, then I think I do not agree that I'm going to hear them say and accept, especially because my lease says there's no modifications unless signed upon us by writing. But I'm not modifying down unless it's better than what they promised, not whether it meets a minimum standard that they could have pitched. Neighbors could have come and complained. They didn't, because I told them it was going to be better. And they didn't, and you approved that. And that's all we're trying to do, is to put in as least as what was good was approved. You don't have to solve West Shore Road's problem. I know West Shore Road has its own drainage issue. We've talked with Brian about something to do that. It's the water that comes onto this problem from this piece of property. It comes in two places where a blind man can see it come on. If we stop it there, what will be left is the West Shore Road no drainage problem, not their problem. Everybody will be happy to say, that problem's been here for 100 years. Thanks for not making it worse. That's all. But it's a different standard than what is the minimum I could have sold you that day. That's not what we did.
We agree there's a lot of work to be done by PAR. The standard that Mr. Chappelle is asserting, we will be certain that it applies to all of the work that he's done without any permits in this no man's land of swales, where there's a berm that was never there before, that had no engineering, was never reviewed before, presently, ever by anybody. Okay, that's an elephant in the room here. Okay, and he's Well, you should, okay? And Mr. Chappelle was the lawyer for this project that presented that, and I know he would never represent the landowner in making the comments he made. He's talking about someone who lives himself, he lives across the street, fine. If this solar project's gonna put water on Mr. Chappelle's own land, then we'll deal with Mr. Chappelle about that. But we're dealing now with a project he got approved before this board as something that had, the findings were consistent with the comprehensive plan, consistent with the zoning ordinance, creates no material adverse impact, and it doesn't result in lots that are unbuildable, which is a non-applicable part of your standard. So that standard applies to the modification. Are we still consistent with the comp plan? Consistent with the zoning ordinance? Are these modifications to the plan that we're proposing something that creates a material health, safety, or welfare issue? That's the standard. That's the standard. And that's what we ask to be held to. Nothing more, nothing less. Did we create this problem with these modifications?
Questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, I would reiterate that, making a motion for a third-party review. And then maybe, I would suggest probably a continuance until a third party completes their review with our TRC, being brought in.
Sure, I'd like to make a motion and, I'm not gonna compel the petitioner to, evaluate runoff off your site and jurisdiction, but, and I'm biased, to Ms. Small's, integrity as a professional engineer. I trust that. I'm sympathetic to, we have had not historic, near historic rainfall accumulation. And there's other factors contributing with the site while it was in development. I've heard all that. Obviously, the abutters statements is very compelling. So with that, I'll make a motion for a continuance and postponement of the modification for the final plan, at least regarding the adjusted stone trenches pending trench corrections with the CRMC comments and pending confirmation by a third-party engineer. Report to the town's TRC, Technical Review Committee, and I'd advise with maybe consultation by a PE from the town. Of that there are no adverse impacts or increased runoff, that no adverse impacts or increased runoff occurred relative to baseline existing conditions or approved drawings and plans through review of the CRMC assented plans and drainage report, as well as the submitted modification plans, the as-built conditions and minor modifications.
Do we have a second? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Right, thank you. The next number, I guess, would be 6. Oh, yeah, yeah, I know, he's not, that's when I got it. He's excusing himself.
Recorded.
I know I am.
No,
So
no,
glad
no,
you said-
no, Ed Lopes has the longest.
Yeah.
What's that?
And well said.
Oh.
I was done perfect. I agree. All right, everybody. Number 5 is the Talaria Real Estate Holdings LLC. AP 43 Lot 5, which is One Little Harbor Landing. It's a request. They're requesting for a preliminary and final approval to construct a 24,000 square foot boat storage building not to exceed 35 feet in height. I understand that we're still waiting for flow tests.
Before the applicant begins, I believe there could be a number of people that are still online, maybe to discuss number 6, the short-term rentals. As an FYI, we earlier in the program, about 3 hours ago, decided to continue that to a future meeting. So apologies if you didn't hear that earlier this evening, but that's continued to a future meeting. So I just want to put that in as a housekeeping measure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, good evening.
Thank you. Good evening, board members. My name is Mike Daly. I represent the applicant here, Talaria Real Estate Holdings. This is our request for preliminary and final approval for construction of a 24,000 square foot building that would be located essentially in the southwest corner of the Talaria property. Just by way of background, I assume the panel or the board is aware generally of the relationship between Talaria Real Estate Holdings and the Hinckley Company. They're related companies. Talaria Real Estate Holdings is essentially the property owning entity, whereas the Hinckley Company is the operating entity on that property. I will try to be as quick as possible. I hope that this application will be one with much less that will raise fewer issues than the other matters before the board tonight. There is, in connection with this application, no request for any relief from the zoning ordinance. The proposed development is fully consistent with the comprehensive plan. We have witnesses here who are able to testify to the project in general, as well as the Hinckley property and its current and anticipated uses and how this project will impact the company. We also have the engineering firm who is involved in the development of this plan, who can provide some additional background for the board. Before we jump into that, though, if I could, I would like just to address briefly the reason why we are here seeking preliminary and final approval at the same time. This is a very time-sensitive project. You may recall we were back here for master plan approval back in December. At that time, the hope was that we would be able to get zoning relief allowing this building to be constructed. I think it was to 53 feet. After we received that master plan approval, this project was before the zoning board, which had denied the request for zoning relief to get to that height variance. Once that happened, Hinckley had to go back to the drawing board, reassess their plans moving forward, which did put sort of this whole process behind about a month until we could figure out, number one, would we go forward under, without seeking a height variance. We had to go ahead and modify the plans to keep up with the development process. The reason why timing is so critical is that we are hoping to have shovels in the ground within about a month so that the project can be completed in October of this year. If that project is not completed in October, and backing it up, is not begun within approximately 30 days, then the project will not be in place for this season. The company would lose an entire season making use of this, and which, as you'll hear today, I think will be not only a benefit to the Hinckley Company, but also to Portsmouth at large. So for that reason, that's why we are trying to accelerate this and combine preliminary approval with final approval.
Can I ask one question?
Yes.
Just so we're not wasting, two things. In the event that we can't give you preliminary and final, in the past, we've had special meetings, like a week or two after this, to help in the short time frame. But I believe we don't have flow tests yet. And is that something that can be done in the next week, so that if we reschedule to try to get both done, knowing that your time frame is sensitive, that we could accomplish that?
So a couple responses to that. First off, we do have a fully engineered fire suppression system plan that has been submitted. It was submitted to the fire department, I believe it was yesterday. We have copies of the plan here today. Right now, while we are awaiting final approval from the fire department, which we do expect will be forthcoming, our hope is that the request, the application today will be granted in full without condition. And I say that because in order for us to get the final building permit, that's going to need to be done anyway. So whatever relief or approval this board would provide today would not obviate or allow Hinckley to get around approval. We're not seeking to get around approval of a final fire suppression plan. We're simply hoping that we can get the final approval today. We'd have certainly no objection to a condition to the final approval, or excuse me. Well, our preference would be that the approval specified that a building permit not be issued until the fire suppression plan is resolved. As I read through the ordinances, I don't believe that fire suppression approval is actually a requirement for final plan approval. Well, again, we acknowledge it's a requirement for a building permit and occupancy. But so it would be our preference to deal with it that way. Our concern with delaying final approval is that would then theoretically even put us back another couple of weeks until their decision could be made and we can get that final stamp on the plan. That would delay the appeal process, which would theoretically delay the issuance of a building permit. And that delay in and of itself would jeopardize this project being able to be completed by October. And for that reason, it's our hope that it would be done and dealt with through the building permit process rather than through this approval process. If that makes sense.
Leah, does that have you comfortable?
I will say that our fire marshal did receive the plans just yesterday.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't consider less than 24 hours adequate time to review the plan. I still don't have an official sign off from him, and he and Allied Fire are still researching whether or not the fire suppression plan is suitable for the building. I don't want to get into a situation where where the project starts and a building permit. I mean, I understand the condition with a building permit not to be issued until the fire suppression plan is approved. What concerns me is that it was pretty clear that there were adequate flow plans at the TRC meeting, and then something changed, and that wasn't the case. I don't know if it was a Navy issue, a valve issue that needs to be fixed. But I feel as though by still approving a preliminary plan with holding off on final plan to be approved administratively, not even having to come back here, would still be sufficient enough and not hold you off on any holding back on any additional construction that, I know it's time sensitive, but, that wouldn't really be a problem.
So again, we certainly recognize that the fire suppression plans were provided yesterday. We're not expecting the, fire marshal to have actually fully reviewed and weighed in on that right now. That's not our position. Again, it's our concern simply that any delay by a week, even on the further consideration process will just necessarily delay everything by the equal amount of time. Whereas if it's handled through the building permit process, there will be no delay because it will all be resolved before then anyway.
So then it shouldn't be any harm that we approve it with the condition that everything passes and that once you pull the permit.
Correct.
their Obligation is covered, but we just, with information that's given to us and without having the information from the fire marshal, it would be bad for us to just rubber stamp the final plan.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yep, we're not asking for that.
And does the fire marshal also, I mean, outside of the fire alarm panel system inside a standard pre-engineered building, want to look at the access issues around the development? I think from the last petition that came up. I don't know if that's a subject to portion of the.
We talked about
Yes.
that at the TRC and, the fire department was satisfied.
They're
with
satisfied with that.
accessibility.
So they're strictly just doing a double check on the fire alarm panel that's subject to permit.
The rack storage buildings are not typical plans that we receive all the time, according to the fire marshal, and he wants to make sure that he gets it right. There there is a situation in town where final plan was given, the building permits were issued, and we're still dealing with a temporary certificate of occupancy for a sprinkler plan that still hasn't been approved. So we're trying to not get into another situation like that. I'm not saying that Hinckley will have that happen. We're trying to clean up how we used to do things in town.
So I guess again, just to address the concern, we would not be looking for a permit before this issue is resolved, a building permit. So I think right, exactly. I think by definition, right, we would be in a different scenario than the one that was just discussed. But I hate to take my presentation out of order, but it just seems to make too much sense. If I could, maybe Paul Sarubian is here with Douglas Construction. He's a general contractor on this project. And he was involved directly with the creation of the fire suppression plan. So he might be able to provide the board with a bit more information on this discrete issue. And then once that's resolved, we can move on.
I don't doubt it. He is, I'm sure, spot on everything that's there. I just want to make sure that we're doing the right thing, that we've taken in consideration how time is very important. If the fire marshal is going to approve this in 24 hours, then us approving it subject to the fire marshal, which at that case, you'd be able to put your permit.
We can have the motion
Right.
with confirmation via the planning officer that the fire marshal concurs.
That'd be great. Thank you. We would certainly be happy to proceed in that way.
I didn't hear what you said, Mr. Tibbetts.
I'm just suggesting related to that portion of the issue that it could be final plan approval contingent on confirmation by the planning officer that the fire marshal concurs without having to go back to next month's board.
That's what I've been suggesting.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
It's just his way of wording it.
I guess I hate to beat a dead horse.
We can put a timeline on that. I think standards.
Right. The question would be, in my mind, when is this approval completed so that any appeal process would be triggered? And I just want to make sure that that appeal process triggering date would not be, you know, down the road. It's my hope that any appeal process triggering date would be tonight. If that,
Are you, Lee, you're suggesting that even if they only got preliminary, the fire marshal had comments, so as to come back to the board, that doesn't necessarily prevent them from breaking ground?
No, what I'm saying is that I have not received a letter from the fire department that they are satisfied with the sprinkler plans and the flow test plans to date. It could be tomorrow, it could be in the next week, but I don't feel comfortable signing off on as a preliminary combined final plan until that is adequately addressed. I don't mind granting preliminary approval and then doing final plan administratively, which can be in a day, once we receive the adequate correspondence we need from the fire department.
And just wondering on a reasonable review, thinking of fire protection engineers that we work with and the backlog of work that they have. In this case, we're not talking about fire protection engineers, talking about the fire marshal looking at a few specific details.
And assuming
So
that he's
thinking the
happy
end of
with
next week is
everything.
probably appropriate.
I don't want to give an exact time frame, but
Right.
that could happen next week.
I mean,
I think it's the same thing, only different. I mean, it's,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
either we say, soon as the fire marshal says he's satisfied with it, could be a phone call to you, then our final approval is given.
Administratively.
Yeah, administratively, which means within 24 hours or 12 hours, if the fire marshal gives the thumbs up.
Exactly. I'm not comfortable moving forward until I have that letter.
Yep. Okay.
So, and so this is, I'll admit here that, I've got some staff report here that has discussion recommendations and then it stops. It doesn't bleed onto the next page, so I'm missing substances. So I want to make sure there's nothing else.
I was hoping, my staff report was hoping that there would be a submission of a fire department sign off prior to the meeting, and that has not happened.
Okay, I got you. As long as, I just want to make sure there's no other
Understood.
contingent concern.
so, you know, maybe it does make sense for me to call our witnesses as we're going through, the fire suppression issue will come up and we could at least,
I
Deal with
you
it.
can.
yeah, I understand that it's,
And I don't care what comes up and said, it's not gonna change my mind. It
certainly.
won't get my vote. And I'm assuming the majority wouldn't think the same as well, is that until that letter from the fire marshal has got the thumbs up from her, we're not gonna do anything. So,
Okay.
like Leah said, you could walk out of here with the preliminary approval and just waiting for the final within, could be 12 hours of the, if he wakes up tomorrow morning and he calls Lee at 8 o'clock, by lunchtime, you could have your final approval and
Sure.
everything's great. But
Okay.
You can, I know you're paying these guys and they sat there, but if this was 8 o'clock, I'd say, okay, I'm still comfortable. But it's been a long, long night for us and it's not gonna. there's
That's fine.
nothing You can say.
Okay, fair enough. I understand the full application is already a part of the record in this matter, so I will just have our witnesses be very brief in recognition of the time of the night. So if I may begin by calling Chris Ruling,
Yep.
who's the general manager. Well,
Yep.
I'll let Chris describe.
Good evening. I certainly appreciate the opportunity in any event. Chris Ruling, I live at 91 Bellevue Avenue, Tiverton, Rhode Island.
Chris, what's your position?
I'm the general manager of the site of Portsmouth.
Okay, can you give just a very quick overview of Hinckley's operations at the facility?
We are we're a full service facility providing all disciplines in the marine industry. I'll be brief on that. I think we've addressed that a little bit in the past. We employ roughly 350 people on the site, in total between all the businesses that are operated on site. The building that we're asking for approval for is exactly consistent with all the buildings currently on site, utilized in a similar, in almost an exact manner, servicing boats of all sizes, both power and sail. We operate a handful of machines, moving boats around, travelers, trailers, and so forth. It's a 16-acre site. The boats that we store on site currently, we're looking to bring down over time once we hopefully receive master site plan approval for the balance of the buildings that we look to erect it at a later date. We currently move approximately 260, 270 boats to off-site facilities in the town of Portsmouth, one in Bristol. By approving this building and subsequent buildings thereafter, it'll allow us the opportunity to bring an awful lot of traffic, both with large trucks moving boats back and forth to and fro from the facilities twice a year and through the course of the winter on and off. Second to that, it will allow us to remove a lot of the cars on the road with our employees traveling to the offsite buildings as well. So it provides a good public safety component to allowing this building to go forward. The purpose of the building is a rack building. It utilizes racks whereby we're able to stack boats on 2 different levels. So it provides some increased utilization of that building space, keeping the boats indoors, and the opportunity to service more boats, as well as provide some additional employees going forward. I'm sure you're familiar with the elevations. We could go through pictures and so forth. They're similar exactly to what's currently on site. The construction of the new building will have the impact I just recently discussed related to the boats coming off sites. Our intended time frame, as you're aware, is to try and get this in place. We won't lose 1 season. We'll effectively lose 2 because we do service boats and store boats in the summer as well. So with that, I will move on to the next subject. If anybody has any questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, quick question. So
Sure.
from what I remember, obviously you're now conforming height, so that's reduced.
Correct.
For you. Did you also reduce the square footage of the footprint from?
We did reduce the square footage a little bit because we were able to, with the result of removing the additional height, it put us in a position where we could modify the existing footprint and still glean the amount of storage that we would at 35 feet with the other side. It also allowed us to become I know you're familiar with our neighboring property, Weaver Cove. It reduced their site of our building, putting a good majority of the building or more square footage in a different direction. So we reduced their visibility of the building. We also moved the building a bit north to accommodate a little bit more setback room against the existing easement.
Road to the south?
That's correct.
There's a setback question with the road, so you're saying if anything.
That's correct.
So that's,
I was gonna ask about that too, thank you.
I was going to say that's shown on the plans. I believe it's plan 5 in the engineering plans that depicts the layout of the proposed building as compared to the southern boundary, as well as the easement area to the south. And it shows that the southern edge of this proposed building at its shortest distance from the southern boundary is about 55 feet. And then that goes all the way up to about 65 feet. At all times, it is off by a minimum of 5 feet from that easement area the 50-foot easement area. So there's no encroachment onto the easement in any way and very far from the southern boundary of the property. And that I think gets to your question, Mr. Tibbetts, about fire and emergency access around the building. That area does allow for full access. That was intentionally addressed as these plans were being finalized based on the comments that we had received previously.
Thank you.
I was curious on some engineering stuff too, like being on the waterfront, looking back since 1938, running the numbers. We've had a hurricane event basically once every 11 years. People forget that on average going back then. And Sandy was like the least and southernmost of those in the calculus. But you had it, your engineer firm has it on there. I'm just kind of excited to see he's got.
We've addressed
all
the
his,
VE zone
live load calcs, snow loads.
component for sure.
So that's good stuff.
Thank you. Chairman.
Thank you.
Okay. And if I may also call Matthew Viana, the engineer with Millstone Engineering. So, Mr. Viana, if you could provide your name and address.
Sure. Matthew Viana, 6 Addy Drive, Bristol, Rhode Island.
And could you describe your professional background for the board?
Sure. I'm a registered professional engineer in the state of Rhode Island, also in Massachusetts and Connecticut. I'm employed by Millstone. We're the engineers of record for this project. I've been practicing site civil engineering design work for about 30 years now. I've testified before this board, the zoning board, many boards before, and most of the states in most of the cities and towns of Rhode Island.
And I'd ask that Mr. Viana be qualified as an expert.
I'll make a motion to qualify Mr. Viana as a professional registered engineer.
All in favor? Aye.
And so just as we start, Mr. Viana here, are you familiar with this general project, the engineering and related work that your firm has put into this project?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and you're aware that all notice has been provided to all budding property owners through your firm as well?
Correct, yes.
Okay. And could you describe quickly the location of the building within the property and the property itself?
Sure. The property is generally a large square or rectangle. It's about 16 acres. This building is located in the most southwest corner of that larger parcel. The building itself is about a half an acre in size. It sits 55 feet, as mentioned earlier, from the southern property line, which puts it 5 feet beyond the easement that's there. The southwest corner is a little further away. It's about 65 feet from the property line. So it's well within all of its building setbacks.
Okay, and is this proposed project consistent with the Portsmouth Comprehensive Community Plan?
Yes, it is.
And what zone is this property in?
The waterfront zone.
Okay, and how does that relate to this project in general?
It's intended for marina use and marina-related activities, and that's what the entire parcel is doing, and this new building will do the same.
And is the proposed development in compliance with the standards and provisions of Portsmouth zoning ordinance?
Yes, it is. No variances are being required.
Will the project have any significant negative environmental impacts?
No, in our opinion, it's actually a bit of a positive impact. We're going to take a half an acre of pavement that's there today, remove it and place a building in its location. That'll remove sanding and salting of that area in the winters. So that automatically will be a positive impact to the environment. Also, we're going to be capturing and infiltrating rooftop runoff on site into the soils below. That's going to reduce runoff leaving the site. So both of those pieces of the puzzle are a positive impact to the environment surrounding the building.
And have all required conditions for approval of the plan been met?
Yes, we have a CRMC assent on file.
Okay, and that was provided in March of 2024 and recorded with the town on March 27th?
Correct.
Will this project result in the creation of any individual lots?
No, not a subdivision.
And will the proposed development have adequate and permanent physical access to a public street?
It does. The property has that access today and nothing's changing about that.
And there was talk earlier about this project having gone through the technical review committee process. Were there any substantive questions that were raised during that process?
There were a few comments. I know the fire access was a comment and that's been addressed. And I know that the fire flow test was something that needed to be done and now that's been done. And it's my understanding that the designer has the flow he needs to do the design that they're doing.
And are you aware if that flow information has been provided to the fire department as well as all of the design and engineering related to the fire suppression system?
I believe it was emailed yesterday.
Public Works, did Public Works raise any issues or make any suggestions related to the application as been
Yes.
as has been provided?
Yes, the Public Works asked that instead of the town engineer be responsible for the inspection process of the site civil work, that the engineer of record, Millstone, be the one to be in charge of that inspection and provide reports to the town.
Okay, and that's acceptable to Hinckley?
Absolutely.
Subject to any questions anybody might have?
Good.
Okay. And just for the sake of good order, if I could maybe just ask Paul Sarubian, just to talk about the status of the submission of the plans. We get it. We're not going to ask you to, it's a sign off on.
Okay.
That's not why. I just want to be clear on where that we stand in the process. So, Paul, could you please state your name and where you live?
My name is Paul Thomas Sarabian. I live on Beacon Avenue in Warwick, Rhode Island.
Okay, and you're with Douglas Construction, which is,
I'm the president and owner of Douglas Construction.
and Douglas is serving as the general contractor for this project?
Yes, I am.
And could you just tell us quickly or tell the board quickly about where in the process the fire suppression planning is and what's been provided to date as of yesterday?
Well, late in May, we were able to get the Navy out there to allow us to do a flow test. The flow tests were performed. The resulting flow test, which is reported inside in the hydraulic calculations for the fire prevention plan at 930 GPM at 30 PSI, which is expected to be adequate water for the project. And shortly following that, about a week ago, we received a letter from Navy stating that there's adequate water available for this project. So we have the letter and we have the flow test for the same from the Authority of Water. Those calculations were given to Allied Fire Sprinkler, and their engineers went ahead and finalized the fire prevention plan for the project. The flow calculations, some of the head specs, some of the equipment specs, as well as a plan for the fire sprinklers are on the plan, which we received yesterday. They were emailed immediately and they were hand delivered along with the fire permit application and the fire review fee yesterday by hand this afternoon or day before.
Subject to any questions that the board may have?
We do have copies if you would like.
It would be all great to me.
Okay.
But thank you.
So, thank you. I guess, I fully respect, the comments that had been made, previously about the staging of this. Again, based on what, the testimony has been, it's very clear that a shovel's not going to go into the ground until these fire suppression plans are approved. On that basis, we'd ask that the board tonight grant preliminary and final approval subject with the issuance of a building permit subject to sign off from the fire department.
Could I just ask one more thing?
Sure.
The property owner to the south, obviously, as everybody knows, has a project in process. They were maybe concerned that originally the building had two main doors. And it was mentioned at the TRC that the main door for in and out of boats will be on the north side with trim for what could be the potential for a future door. Can you confirm that the future door will or will not ever be used?
So I guess there are two parts to that. Right now, the plan is not to have a southern facing door. That's correct. I suppose I can't stand here and represent that at no point ever in the future will there be a southern facing door. All I can say is right now, there certainly is no plan. There had been a change to actually take that out. I guess substantively though, the presence of a southern facing door really has no bearing on the easement because the presence of a southern facing door wouldn't restrict access by any easement holders over that area. So I guess the short answer is right now, there's certainly no plan to do that. They have been modified to take that out. I can't say what may or may not happen at any point in the future.
Is the southern door or something like as if a long boat was being brought in there, that they'd be blocking the road until that trailer and truck were backed into the building?
There's the potential, but it seemed, according to how the applicant presented it, it seems best suited to only work out of the northern door because that's where all their space is right now.
Absolutely. And that's the reason why the plan is really to have the door on the northern face really serve as the way in and out. And that's why there is no plan to have it to the south. So again, I'm just saying that I simply can't, as I stand here today, say what may or may not be sought 10 years in the future.
Logistically, it makes no sense to really
Right.
have a southern door, just for ease of moving boats and the length they're in. We would obviously use the easement in kind at times, with the Weaver Code. But additionally, there's pretty significant financial component by not moving the door.
But so is there, if I walked into the building when it's built, there's a big framed opening for a future door? Gonna be there in the steel inner liner structure of the building?
Correct.
Or is it gonna have like the other two other walls that don't have any openings?
The south, the three sides of the building will all look the same. The north face obviously will have a door, but other than that, aesthetically, there's no difference in the
Aesthetically being the skin, but if I peeled the skin off, is there a framed opening that's in the
right
building?
now, there is a design frame in that space. Yes.
There is or is not?
There is.
Okay. So it makes it, if there's ever gonna be another opening in the building, in that spot, will be there. Because if there's no plans, why would you ever put in the first?
Well, I think there had been a plan previously, and then it was sort of, there was throughout this process.
We didn't change the engineering.
Yeah.
And who's to say at some point in time that the Weaver Cove property becomes available, and then it would change the logistics of potentially using that door.
Yeah. So, but one way or the other, there's nothing about this property that impinges in any way on the easement. So.
You're so darn good at making those.
We should probably ask if there's anybody in the
Wait.
public or online that wants to comment.
Is there anybody in the audience? Is there anybody online?
If there's anybody virtually listening in and has a comment, please raise your hand. None noted virtually.
Okay.
Okay, I'll make a motion then to grant preliminary approval for the boat storage building at the 24,000 square feet, not to exceed the conforming 35-foot height as depicted, and grant authorization for the planning officer to grant final plan approval administratively and contingent on the planning officer receiving concurrence from the fire warden on the fire protection plan and flow test data that he has. I guess I would add approval administratively and with conditions if appropriate. If there's conditions where you feel, Leah, that it can still be, that he has still approved it with conditions, I would add that to the administrative approval.
Are you giving me a lot of leverage?
I know.
We trust you.
And I had asked that be conveyed by 20 May. And otherwise, add that if there are significant concerns to address that can't be approved with conditions, that we schedule a continuance of the meeting to the 8 June planning board, so that it's at least on the agenda, if not, if you are not in a position to approve it.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay.
That's it, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'll take it, you can talk with the fire marshal and
We talk every day.
Yeah.
Oh, we got.
Yeah, we got a new guy.
No, I'm
I would
sorry. I think the last thing on the agenda is the monthly project status report. What's the pleasure of the board?
Make a motion, we accept the project status report as written.
I'll second that.
All right, motion made in second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And move for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn. All in favor?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. I don't think there'll be anybody opposed.
No.